They seem to be the one seed. Nobody understands what's going on. And every time I try to tell everybody that hockey is the best sport, they point out something like the Buffalo Sabres are the one seed in this sport that you are saying is good. And I must admit, you have a point there, hypothetical person I just invented. But you guys all know the rules. The rules are, if my team is in the playoffs, the sport is not only real, it's the most real of any sport. And if my team is not in the playoffs, that sport is fake and does not matter. So chat, please give me updates on the score of the Bruins-Sabres game. And otherwise, I'll try to get through this show. We're both going to try to get through this show and have a good one. And before I bring my guest in tonight, I am going to thank our first show sponsor, which is our friends at Goldco. It's officially a new era for gold and silver. Gold has broken $5,000 an ounce. Silver has surged past 100 in 2025 alone. Gold jumped 64%, while silver skyrocketed 150%. And with political and economic uncertainty ahead, 2026 could bring even bigger moves. After such a historic run, a pullback is normal. Metals move fast, so some consolidation is expected. But top analysts are calling for even higher prices. We've seen the first bank failure of 2026, with regulators shutting down Metropolitan Capital Bank and Trust in Chicago. Could more follow? It's no surprise Americans are pulling money from banks and turning to the proven protection of gold and silver. And it's big news. Goldco is celebrating America's 250th anniversary with a limited time bonus. Get up to 10% free gold or silver, plus free storage and a free home safe with a qualifying cash purchase. The offer won't last. As are we seeing the early signs of another 2008 style crash? Don't wait for the next shoe to drop. Protect your wealth with precious metals, because in uncertain times, gold and silver shine brightest. Visit badlandsgold.com today for your free 2026 gold and silver kit and bonus buy. badlandsgold.com. All right, guys. My guest tonight is a returning guest. We had a miscommunication last week that was mostly my fault. So he thought he was the guest last week, but I kicked him out right before the show. But he's actually the real guest this week, and that is CannCon. How's it going, man?
What's going on, brother? I'm so sorry that you're not getting to watch the black and gold tonight.
Well, you're not getting to either. I figure we're both making sacrifices, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about it? Let's get that out of the way.
My sacrifice is way worse, man. My Florida Panthers shit the bed this season. Tons of injuries, though, but It was a good run. It was a good run.
Back-to-backs. How quickly fortunes change. And Florida is relevant to the Bruins in a few ways, along with my wife's alleged team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, because while Don Sweeney of the Bruins has had a very mixed track record as owner, he kind of fleeces everyone around the league when it comes to trades. And he definitely fleeced Toronto, although they got so bad this year that their pick swap, they might keep it because it's top 5 protected. So we gave Toronto last season, when we were selling off as a fire sale, we gave Toronto Brandon Carlo, who's now like a third pair defenseman up there, for Fraser Minton, who's our top line center, and a pick swap this year, which could be top 10 if it conveys to us. And we also got the Florida Panthers 2027 pick because of little Brad Marchwamp. But was it all injuries down there? How's the team?
We lost Barkov, our captain, in the preseason. We lost Kachuk for 3/4 of the season. I mean, there was at one point where, we have season tickets, and at one point I had gone to a game and I couldn't tell you anybody on the team on the ice outside of the starting line.
This is like the good thing about a team like that, though, is once they get the guys back, this turns into cash in the bank year of like draft pick and development of all those guys that wouldn't have developed otherwise, which is kind of what last year turned into for the Bruins. We all thought this was going to be a teardown, and now we're in the playoffs. And I was saying to somebody a little bit ago before the show that everyone says playoff sports are different. Like the NBA says that, the NFL says that, everything says that. But as a hockey fan, and any hockey fans watching the show know, that NHL hockey is a fundamentally different sport than regular season hockey.
Oh yeah.
And it's so funny because I'm pretty sure, and I would never say I'm sure about anything in hockey, but I think the Bruins are going to beat the brakes off of Buffalo in this series, even though they're like the 7 seed, just because it's Buffalo and it's the playoffs. So it is kind of one of those funny things. In the NHL, it's just like, just get in and then see where it goes.
Yeah, playoff hockey in the NHL is like another experience. It's like it's like up until recently, I used to watch the Olympics. Like the Olympics was like the crazy thing. Like I used to love being able to turn on the TV and get Olympic sports, no matter what time of day it was. And that's gone away in the last decade or so. But hockey, the NHL hockey, playoff hockey is the same way. You can turn on any game and you're immediately
right
vested in that game, big
Yep.
time. Big time.
Yeah,
So
it's good shit.
I'll make you a deal here. If and when the Lightning get knocked out, I will root for the Bruins because I do have ties to Boston. I have family from there. I am a Red Sox fan.
Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
Yes, I am a Red Sox fan. But so yes, I actually have a Bruins jersey sweater. I have an Irish one, a St. Patrick's Day. It's all green. And
you've met my wife, and her sensibilities are much more in line with being a Bruins fan. And I tell every year, I say before the season starts, I say, "Do you want to get on the train?" I give her an opportunity every year because she secretly likes them, and is all about Boston since moving here. But she just has that like survivor's guilt of being from Toronto, and I get it. I do get it. I give her shit. But you know that when the Leafs eventually win, like when our kids are grown and everything, she's going to be so upset if she jumps off the train. But yeah, in the meantime, she suffers in silence.
I think we all can agree anybody but a Canadian team. I will root for any American team. Also, there's rumors going around, just throwing this out there. There's rumors going around that Connor Hellebuck might be a Panther.
Really?
Yes.
Of the Winnipeg Jets.
The Winnipeg Jets, yeah.
Interesting.
The guy that chokes in the playoffs every single season.
but pulls off the performance in hockey history against the most stacked hockey team ever assembled in the playoffs. And for people who aren't hockey fans watching this show, first of all, find Jesus. What are you doing? Jesus is obviously a hockey fan. And second of all, we'll stop speaking hockey and transition into the show. So, having a pretty broad show tonight. I intentionally only gave CannCon a couple brief notes, but I want to kind of hit this from a couple angles. This is less getting into the nitty gritty. I think the Iran war narrative has been, it's been one of those rare narratives in the info war that is, in the context of the info war, it's been running for a long time, right? It's like, what are we at? 7 weeks or something like that now, 6-7 weeks. In media time, that's a long time, right? And we're so used to, even media people acknowledge that the era of Trump is accelerated. So it's a long time for us to all be talking about the same thing. I'll say that while 2025, I was criticizing the writing of the central narrative. I thought that even the Patriots and White Hats, the stories were kind of boring. We'd been there, done that. I like the Iran war narrative. I think it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of angles to it. So we can talk about some of that, but I wanted to bring you on for a different angle of that. I want to talk about the state of info war media, sort of in the second hour that you're here. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the military, and not a logistical war strategy, war gaming type of thing, but the story of the American military. Obviously, you're a veteran. But you're the rare guy, you and Alpha, who are veteran, and Josh, right? Veterans who are also info war guys, and that means something different, I think, than just media guys who are veterans, because you acknowledge or realize a lot of the lies of the past, just like all of us have. And before we get into the Iran war stuff that's going on right now, I'm sure you've told your stories on SitRep and on other shows, but for me and for some of the people that watch the narrative, I'm wondering what in general was your call to go to war or to go to the military when you did when you were young. And I guess on that note, how do you feel about that in hindsight? Do you feel the same way, or has it changed, positively or negatively since then?
Well, I mean, so obviously, I think anybody that enlisted post 9/11, that was the driving force right there. Was 9/11, right? I mean, I was a senior in high school when it happened, and we watched it on the TVs, and it's there's kind of that silence in the room and I went to a Catholic school, very it was a very good school, high rate of students that ended up going on to college, a lot of Ivy League schools and stuff like that. I was not one of those. But there was a lot, you could kind of see the air get sucked out of the room as all the guys are looking around at each other like, holy shit, we might be going to war. This could be it. I didn't enlist until 5 years after I had gotten out. I went and I was going to go to the Annapolis. When I got out, I tried to get my appointments to Annapolis. Didn't end up going that route. Went and started a business. Worked for my dad for a little bit on the side to make ends meet while I was getting it running. And then just one day, I was like, you know what, man? Like, this is something I got to do. Like, this is something I know when I'm 50 years old, 60 years old, I'm going to be like, shit, I really should have went and enlisted. Now, I bought into it hardcore.
Yeah.
I bought into it hardcore. Like, I was one of the guys that was on social media, Facebook, MySpace back then,
The early days of social media engineering.
Mr. Tom never censored nobody.
Yeah.
And I was one of the guys that was like, just carpet bomb the whole fucking thing.
Yeah.
Right? Just carpet bomb the whole thing. Like, just kill them all.
Yeah.
And full blown, Bush retard back then. Now, obviously, that's changed significantly. The interesting thing about this war, BB, is there is no 9/11 moment, right? We don't have that moment with this war. We don't have that everyone's together, rallying together, flying American flags out of our, off our car windshields. We just don't have that. And some of the things, and Trump has said this, others have said this, mainly others have said this, the whole, well, it's been coming for 47 years. I think JB had said it at GART, right? This is payback for 47 years ago. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. 47 years ago, there was a different administrations, different, people alive in the planet, different people commanding the military, all sorts of things. And so to me, like, that was just like, like when I don't know if you have brothers or sisters, but when one of you gets in trouble, or when you get in trouble, you try and like pass some of that blame off, and you're like, well, she did this 6 weeks ago, and that was fine. That's what it kind of felt like. So, I'll stop that there.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's kind of the direction I want to go in, because I think what you lay out is, again, the theme of this show, and what I talk about mostly is the narrative. And you're right that 9/11 is an event I refer to as an actual narrative event, actual-narrative event. And it's not unique, but it is unique in terms of how powerful it was. By that, I mean 9/11 happened. Very, very few people dispute that. I actually went to high school with a kid whose dad was on the plane that left, I forget which flight it was, but that left from Logan Airport. So like, that was in my town in terms of trying to figure out what was going on there. His mother ended up years later being invited to like the Obama White House as part of the truther movement, 9/11 truther movement. Of course, in hindsight, I feel differently about those Obama days than I did at that point. I was like, Obama's going to get to the bottom of 9/11, man. He's going to tell us what happened there. But the actual event was a mass trauma event. And then the narrative, I say this not because I'm endorsing it, but from a storytelling perspective, in the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution, that I focus a lot of my time on, it is hard to find in modern times a more compelling and powerful example of that Hegelian loop as 9/11, right? Because everyone in the country saw the thing happen. Nobody really disputed that the thing happened. And they so quickly had the story ready for who did this thing and what we got to do about it, that even a lot of liberals, and I was a kid, I was 12 when that happened. So I wasn't old enough to be forming opinions on it besides just being traumatized by it during school. But a few years later, I distinctly remember when I was 14, 15 is when I started being like, there was arguments in schools about it. There was arguments on TV about it once we were committed to these wars that you ended up being involved in. So I started to understand like, oh, the whole country doesn't kind of just get on the same page with these things. The country can be fighting a war that half the country is not okay with. But again, which you brought up, the story of 9/11 was so powerful that I wonder, with the benefit of hindsight, you've kind of reflected on that time, and I know you've done that a million times. But specifically for tonight, I'm interested more in how are you able to maintain that pride in the U.S. military? Because I think you and a lot of military members do, and a lot of Americans want to have pride in the military. And to your point about the Iran war, are you finding the military people that have looked back at 9/11 and everything with hindsight, are they responding differently to the Iran war narrative than they did to the 9/11 one? Like you said, there was no rallying event, or are they largely responding in a similar way?
That's fascinating, man. Like, so the only thing I can say in terms of my personal knowledge of this, my sister is much younger than me. She's 19, and she was dating a guy. I think he was in the Coast Guard, and was going over there. Like, he's being deployed over to the Strait somewhere, OPSEC and all that. And they're excited. Like, they're excited to go over there. So I can't say that for every branch. I think I could say, I would say unequivocally, your Marines are for sure all in. Like,
They're all in, yeah.
to sign up for, and there are different levels of readiness, in my opinion, and mental readiness and mental willingness in our military. And you don't join the Marines to get the GI Bill, right? Nobody joins the Marines to get the GI Bill. You don't typically join any infantry, army, any special forces, anything like that to get the GI Bill. You're right. Doing it to go kick some ass. And so I think, at that level, yeah, they're excited about this. They're all in. Whether or not they're going to have that epiphany, years later, who knows? We don't know, because we don't know the story yet, right? We just know what's being told in the media. At Badlands, we tend to look a little bit deeper than most people. I was having a conversation with a bunch of guys today out on the water, and they just have no clue, what's actually going on with this. And they think it's just, we're going over there and we're kicking their ass because they bombed us and they can't have a nuclear weapon, right? Because that's what everybody is telling them. So in the military itself, I think there's a push for it. Like, they want this. Like, that's what they signed up for. We're a volunteer force. So yeah, I'll land that there for you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, and to your point, you just ended on there with the I've been saying recently, especially in 2026, the Iran war narrative for sure has revealed, I think, that we truly are at Badlands, and just as people who know that there is such a thing as the info war, we are in a bubble the likes of which maybe we didn't even realize. Like, I'm starting to feel that way, where I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I guess you could go either way with it, but it does feel like we are operating in a different reality. And then the only caveat I would put on, I agree with you that we try to look into things deeper, right? But we have our opinions of what's going on over in Iran. You and I might see it completely differently. I don't know. But I think we do a pretty good job of not pretending we know exactly what's going on. In fact, a lot of our rhetoric is that we don't know what's going on. And ironically, that has become a controversial thing to say, right? It's kind of funny. Like, the most controversial stuff Badlanders say is, you don't know that for sure. And people get really mad about it. But just that alone, just saying, I don't know what's going on, and I'm not going to pretend I do know what's going on, and I'm not going to pretend there is something actually going on over there. And that alone separates us from most people that you talk to. It just demonstrates that even though I talk about the narrative all the time and I say everything comes down to narrative, your anecdote of being out on the water with these guys, like, we have so many of those. Everybody watching the show, that what is that? What are you describing? You're describing that these guys are being told a story, even if it's by the good guys, and the de facto settings of human beings, of Americans, is just, that's the story. That's what I'm going to react to, right? And the funny thing about the guys you're talking to, I'm sure most of them are Trump guys and military guys, etc. But both them and the liberals that hate them and that hate us are all basically aligned in accepting the central narrative as it is being told to us. Which, I don't know. I mean, I guess with that note, I wonder, I shouldn't have taken it as just an assumption at the beginning of the show, but with all the guys you know in the military, has there been a retroactive change in how they feel about the post 9/11 era? Forgetting the Iran war situation and Donald Trump. Do they feel differently about that war? Like, have they gone through the process that people like you and Alpha have? Or do you think you and Alpha are pretty rare in terms of having gone through that, like, why was I over there? What was going on sort of process?
I think they're all, most of them, I can't say all, but only still in absolutes. But I think most of them are now at the point where they're like, shit, I don't think bin Laden was going to be able to do anything inside of the United States. I don't think, this was the war that we were told it was. Now, have they gone as far as the opioid pandemic and tying that and the poppy and linking that to Afghanistan, or, some of the financial interests that we had in Iraq? We all obviously bought into the WMDs, and we got to make sure Saddam doesn't have the WMDs, and sounds right. Just strikingly, shockingly familiar to, the Iran story. 47 years, right? They could have for 47 years, we could have a bomb tomorrow. Same kind of thing there. I think most of them. So I'm reading a book, my buddy, and if I'm going to plug it, maybe I can't find it. One of the guys I served with just wrote a book, and it came out. I got it. I got it, I think, on Thursday. And like, I read 150 pages in the first 2 hours. I couldn't put it down, but it's the story that I was. But hearing him describe that war and, how, we were going over there to fight the Taliban. Well, we weren't really fighting the Taliban. We didn't fight the Taliban nearly as much as we believe we fought the Taliban. We fought a lot of drug lords that were trying to protect their community, trying to protect their village, trying to protect their property, their land. It wasn't the Taliban quite as much as we thought it was. And just kind of reading some of the things that he says about 9/11 and the emotions that he felt following 9/11. And I've had this conversation with him. I don't know where he was at writing the book, but we've had this conversation before, actually up in Massachusetts. And I know that he understands that the war we fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, was much more political than we want to let on. And we thought we were going over there to get revenge and get the guys that did 9/11. But 20 years later, people start saying, what the fuck? This is not that.
Have you seen, that makes me think of, I think I might have asked you this in the Badlands chat a month ago, but me and Chris recently did the movie Warfare, Alex Garland's Warfare 2025. Have you seen that?
I have not. I saw the previews for it, and it looked pretty intense. So
I normally would be like, who fucking cares, right? But I've seen a lot of war movies. Obviously, I've never served in war, but that one to me felt, as a non-veteran, like if I was recommending this to a veteran, I would definitely hit them with disclaimers and say, I don't know how you do with stuff like that, but the whole premise of that film, from what I understand, is that, it was literally, it was the special, or not special, what are they? They were SEALs. The SEALs who were involved in the true story mission, I believe in Afghanistan, from, I forget which year it was, but the SEALs who were involved in consulting on that film, which is not uncommon in these military-linked films, they were so involved that one of them ended up getting a co-director credit, or a co-writer's credit on the film. And Alex Garland in Hollywood circles is very well known. He's a well-known screenwriter. So the fact that they put the SEAL's name right next to him shows how intricately involved he was. But that's just to say that the whole movie takes place in like one house. Like basically, these SEALs take a house. They're waiting for next orders, and the locals figure out that they're in there, and all hell breaks loose. Right? Very intense, very tough to watch. So I don't know how you deal with those things, but it might be interesting for you to watch or not. But either way, one of the things Chris and I talked about, people who are insulated from having had those experiences, is that there is an advantage and a disadvantage of that, right? The advantage, I think, for people like us is we probably are more naturally objective when looking at a situation like that than people who experience it directly are, right? The disadvantage is that the disadvantage is that we aren't feeling the human cost of those things. We didn't know the guys who their legs were getting fucking blown off and all the shit that people have seen and people like you and Alpha have seen. But the reason I thought of that movie is because you just mentioned the Taliban. And one of the most interesting unwindings, I think, of the Trump era technically occurred during the Biden administration, right? And it was the Kabul withdrawal. I think this is related to how somebody like me sees what's going on in Iran, which is admittedly a very specific framing. But if you look at the Kabul withdrawal, we've talked about this. Joe Biden was the president, our boy Blue. The central narrative was this is humiliating for the commander-in-chief. This is kind of humiliating for the military. But what were the net effects after the Kabul withdrawal? The American military is out of Kabul. This entangled forever war situation. And the Taliban end up with a ton of weapons. And then the Taliban start using those weapons in the next year to hunt down ISIS burrows in the region. And as our old friend Just Human had said in 2021, I don't know if he still believes this or not, but at that time he was like, well, if the Taliban end up going after ISIS, that would consummate Donald Trump's proposed Doha agreement with them. And that's one of those narratives that you don't even have to get into what Chris Paul talks about, which is like the ridiculous looking Afghans running after the last plane out of Kabul, to question what's going on with these Trumpian situations, because you just look at the after effects and think, are we better off now? And I wonder, you brought up the Taliban. That's who you were fighting over there, presumably. Do you think much about, whether or not, I guess another way to put this is, while a lot of military people have looked back on that period of time and thought, hey, maybe we got into that war for the wrong reasons, I still notice that a lot of them are like, those were the bad guys, though. Those were still bad guys. The controversy is, should we have been fighting those bad guys over there? But there's a slightly emerging train of thought that is, was the Taliban the bad guys? Or were there some other bad guys over there? I wonder what you think of that. There's so many factions that you dealt with over there, and have you changed how you've thought about any of those factions that you did come across at that time in hindsight?
A lot of that boils down to perspective, and that is the thing that is so hard for people to understand. And me and Alpha have this discussion in roundabout ways all the time, because we'll be talking about like Iran, and he'll be like, well, we need to be focused on the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'll be like, yeah, but the Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni thing. It's not a Shia thing. So it's more in the Arab world as opposed to the Persian world. And so we always have these back and forths. And, when I talk to, kind of people that are more in line with the Fox Newses of the world, and we talk about these kinds of things, they'll say, well, they chant death to America. And I'm like, yeah, but from their perspective, it's a hegemony. Like we are the oppressor of their nation. We have been for years and years. The intelligence operations that we've ran against them, Operation Ajax in 1953, in 1953, in 1979. What's that?
Yeah, I don't even know that one.
Oh yeah, that's where we overthrew. We installed Pahlavi. We overthrew the prime minister there. What was his name? Mossadegh. I think it was Mossadegh. We overthrew him and installed in conjunction with MI6, installed Pahlavi. flew him in from the EU, well, it wasn't the EU at the time, but I think from France, and installed him. And they went through 20 years with Pahlavi, and then it started destabilized there as well, and that's when the Iranian Revolution kicked off, which our intelligence wasn't as, and this is just surface level from what I know, our intelligence wasn't as involved in that, but MI6 was big time. From what I understand, from what I believe in this, they were big time involved in that. And so when you look at somebody chanting death to America and you actually ask somebody that is Iranian, what do they mean? What do you guys mean when you're saying death to America? Well, we don't mean we want to go over there and kill all of you. We mean get your intelligence the fuck out of our country. Stop putting your influence on our country. Same thing we did in Venezuela. And this is where, President Trump's Venezuela plan that he said that in Mar-a-Lago, in Doral a month ago, when he said, well, we've got the plan from Venezuela, right?
Yeah, the Venezuela model.
The Venezuela model. We're gonna use that in Iran. And that's why I think Khamenei is going to end up being, Mustafa Khamenei is going to end up being the leader there, because that's the same thing that happened in Venezuela. But Venezuela was another product of this. This was another country that, yes, it was tragic. One of the guys that was out in the water with today is from Venezuela. And I live in South Florida.
Was he one of the secret boat Venezuelans that saved the election? Or
no,
okay,
no, he didn't know anything about that. He had heard of Badlands though. He watched Rumble.
Nice.
And I told him I was with Badlands. He saw my hat, and he's like, "I've seen Badlands on Rumble before." I was like, "Well, now you're gonna have to watch it." but he said like the same thing there. I told him, he says, "Well, everybody was miserable in Venezuela." I said, "Yeah, but you guys were miserable because we created that misery. We are the ones that destabilize that by sanctioning you and making everything difficult for your government to be able to, effectively work anywhere with any partners anywhere on the globe." Right. And so I think a lot of the war itself boils down to perspective. And I will say this, man, like when we were in Afghanistan, the Pashtun people that in the villages that we were at, they loved us. They loved us being there. Now, as far as the Taliban, a lot of people don't realize that the Taliban, when they kind of rose to power in Afghanistan, I'm not going to say it was glorious and that they treated everybody great and everything, but the poppy, that was a no-go for them. You were not allowed to grow poppy under the Taliban initially. That wasn't until we came in and took over that they were allowed to willingly grow this stuff. And again, tying back to the intelligence and the actual, what I believe to be the actual justification for us being, or the intelligence justification for us being over there.
I love what you said about Venezuela, which I want to get deeper into, but you just mentioned the people of the Pashtun. Is that what you called them?
Pashtun,
why do you think they were excited to see you? Like who did they feel oppressed by? Was it the Taliban, or was it Al-Qaeda and proxy groups? Like who did they, is it because they considered themselves oppressed and they liked seeing Americans there?
I think broadly, I don't think they appreciate the poppy. Because it doesn't all make its way to the United States to get pushed on the opioid epidemic of the 2006, 2007, 2008 era. It doesn't all make it over there, and there was rampant drug use in a lot of these small villages, and so I don't know if that was it or what. Now I do know, if you've ever seen Lone Survivor, the Marcus Luttrell story with Mark Wahlberg. At the very end of that, after Mark Wahlberg's character Luttrell, after that's not Marcus Luttrell. Who is that? Yeah, that is Marcus Luttrell. Yeah, because he's in the movie. What am I thinking? At the very end, they talk.
Luttrell. Wahlberg plays Luttrell.
Yeah, and
I knew Taylor Kish was in that. A random note: I had just watched that Dark Wolf show, and I was like, "This is not the first military show I've seen Taylor Kish in," and I didn't remember that he was in Lone Survivor.
Dark Wolf is the sequel, but it's a prequel.
It's a prequel to Terminal List. It was good. Yeah. I was surprised. I didn't think it was going to be very good, but I quite liked it. But yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Did you watch Terminal List first?
Yeah, I did. I saw that a few years ago. That was good.
Ash made me watch that, and Christy and I both.
I find the Terminal List sort of. I like watching these because I like seeing what the propaganda is, what the angles on the propaganda is. I found the Terminal List to be less propagandish than something like Jack Ryan, which that show I like. But oh my God, Jack Lyon, Freudian slip. Jack Ryan is just a lionization of the CIA. And in hindsight, if you watch like Jack Ryan season 2, it's basically all about destabilizing the Maduro regime in Venezuela. And there's like a female populist that's running against him that's backed by the National Endowment for Democracy, and Jack Ryan is trying to help her out. So you're like, oh man, it's fascinating. If you guys want to watch like a out in the open, paint by numbers, this is the CIA plan in the years ahead to destabilize sovereign alliance operations, Jack Ryan is the show. It will tell you, like, in order, we're going to destabilize Venezuela, then we're going to destabilize the Middle East. We're going to go after season 3, I think, was about them trying to start a war between Russia and the U.S. With Ukrainian oligarchs involved. It's pretty incredible. But anyway, you were making a point about Lone Survivor, and at the end, he does end up with those people, right? The Pashtun people.
Yeah, and at the very end, they have a little, like, I don't know what you call it, like a credit at the end where they talk about Pashtun, and they have an actual code among them that when you're in their presence, when you're in their village as a guest, they honor you, regardless of, you know, what they think of you. And we've had, when we were in Afghanistan, I mean, we had people that, like we had a guy that came to our hill. I was actually just reading it in the book. We had a guy one time that came up on our hill, and somebody had shot his daughter in the leg. And she came up on the hill to get medical treatment or whatever. And, you know, we, of course, are going to treat her. We don't know if we did it or not. It was in a firefight, and, you know, who knows what happened. Right. But he came up there, and you would think that when somebody is in your neighborhood, in your village like this, and they're not welcome, you don't know why they're there. You don't know the politics of why they're there, but you're genuinely happy that they're there. There's something going on with that. And I mean, these are people that had no televisions. They don't have radios. You know, some of them have radios, but they really don't have, you know, cell phones and that kind of stuff. So they're very cut off. I'm talking very primitive people here. You know, all they want to do is pray, farm, and live their life with their family, and that's it. They don't do anything else. And they were excited to have us there. And so you got to think that there's a reason for that, whether it's because we brought security to the region, whether we were building, you know, we built schools and wells and things like that for them. Who knows what that reason is? But I tend to think that there is, and this is to a point you made, or a question that you kind of threw at me earlier. Do we, you know, is there any regret in what we did over there, and how does the military, you know, perceive our actions while we were over there? And like, what do we think of the military moving forward? I mean, obviously I have a lot of animosity and, you know, I have a grudge against the leaders that sent us over there, Bush, Obama, but that doesn't take away from, you know, everybody probably at about lieutenant colonel and below that don't know all the details. Now there's colonels and generals that absolutely knew what the hell was going on. And I've got no love for those guys, but for the most part, you know, the guys that were on the ground with me, you know, from a lieutenant colonel, my battalion commander, and below, mad respect for those guys. We did what we signed up to do. We did what we thought was right at the time, and that doesn't take away from the intent in our hearts while we were over there.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me, even as somebody who never served, and obviously I was liberal-minded at the time, and unfortunately, this is the controlled opposition dynamic that Chris Paul talks about all the time. One example of the controlled opposition dynamic is something like the U.S. military that you were part of and the Taliban, right? That's a very literal, kinetic version of it, but American micro of that is the left-right paradigm, the pro-war, anti-war, right? And that's how you were framed. People like you and people defending you were being framed as pro-war,
right?
Which is not really necessarily true. And people like me that were anti-war, anti-that war, for partisan reasons, in hindsight, I developed an animosity toward the military, toward the U.S. military. And I've been able to shed that, but it's taken a long time to shed that. And I think the same thing happens with military veterans, right? Who and their families toward quote unquote leftists who are, and this is one of the dynamics that I've tried to explore in different ways, especially with the Iran narrative, because I trust Donald Trump. That's why I think a lot of what's going on here is narrative. I do think it's sovereign alliance coded. I think Venezuela set the template, as Donald Trump told us, and as you mentioned. But I still think this Iran war situation is an opportunity to see where everybody is at in the American zeitgeist, right? Because some of the points you led the show with demonstrate that most Americans, left, right, and center, are observing the world as they are being told it is. They are observing the world. Whatever Donald Trump says is going on over there is going on over there. If you like Trump, you're in favor of it. If you hate Trump, you hate it. But I guess I've been a little surprised, and it's been sobering for me to see that it feels like as a nation, we didn't actually take away a lot of the lessons from the last forever war situation over there. Again, I've tried to look back and say, okay, I was demonizing the military when really they were the ones being sent over there. And the reason I can still watch things like these war movies and true, quote unquote, true stories and really get something out of them besides propaganda is I do recognize that like there's all these moments of micro heroism that are occurring in these engineered wars, right? They're people that are there, most of them are there altruistically. I think the reason I bring up the Taliban, and I'm not claiming this, I just think it's an interesting thought experiment. In light of Donald Trump being willing to make deals with them, he's not willing to make deals with ISIS, right? And that says something to me, right? Like that, to me, that isn't just, we don't want to be at war anymore over here, so we have to make friends with our enemies, with the bad guys. To me, I read that more as the Taliban might not have quite been what we were told they were. And how is Donald Trump supposed to communicate that? Rarely, normally in the info war and what we do, what you and I do, we're talking about how does Donald Trump convince like normie retard liberals of what he needs to do. This is the rare situation in the Middle East where I still think he's working on the conservative sphere and the military sphere. How does Donald Trump translate to a generation of veterans like you that are not like you and Alpha who have woken up to this stuff? Hey, we're going to do some deals with the Taliban now. And I wonder what you think of that, because I do think he's kind of de facto drawn a line of demarcation between like ISIS, we're still bombing the fuck out of any chance we get. And we're helping the Taliban bomb the fuck out of them. But the Taliban, like, we're cool. We're renormalizing relations. And if that changes what might have been going on, the reason I say that is because I mentioned these microcosms of heroism that people like you engaged in and witnessed. But could you argue that was going on the Taliban side too? That they're like, these guys are in our village with green uniforms on, and they are not us.
That's exactly what it is, and that goes back to the perspective thing. There's two sides to every story, and one of the things that has been really difficult for me to do, and I get a ton of shit for this. Like whenever I say something, like when this war first kicked off, and you try and picture things from the perspective of the enemy, and again, like you just said, what are these men in green uniforms doing walking around in our village? They have no business here. Well, try and flip that around to, where we're at and picture your community. And all of a sudden you have this foreign occupying force come in and set up a patrol base in your community, and they start walking around. Now, that they're superior to you in terms of capabilities, right? They have more firepower. They have aircraft that fly overhead that you've never seen before. Right. Well, maybe, if they're alive during the Mujahideen, they might have seen some Russian aircraft. But you're gonna resist that. You're gonna push back against that. And that is why I don't have any animosity towards the people we fought over there. I totally understand that. There's also a warrior, code, and this is something again that other people don't understand. Like I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people that we fought against, like the people that went toe to toe with us in Afghanistan. Even the ones that killed people I know, Doesn't mean I don't like them, but I respect them. And
Yeah.
I understand what they did and why they did it. And that's the hard thing, is looking at perspective like that. And that is one of the things, like this war, when it first kicked off, like I remember February 28th, right? I wake up in the morning. It's Saturday morning. I actually saw Ash had posted something on X at like 2:00 in the morning Eastern time. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
We're going to war with Iran. And I was pissed. That was my first reaction, is what in the fuck is this? So then I wait the next day. I'm reading through all this, and we can get into, what drove that war and why I think that war kicked off, quote unquote war. But nothing about this war makes sense. This is not anything anywhere near what we saw in Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, and again, this is a good thing, but 13 KIAs and 7 of which were in an accident. Where two of our planes collided, right? Our downed aircraft were shot down by our allies in Kuwait, 3 F-15s, which, by the way, that's fucking weird as shit.
Following the exact plot of Behind Enemy Lines.
Well, that's
the other
Dude
one.
44. This was like within the first week or so, when they're like, oh yeah, Kuwait just accidentally shot down 3 F-15s, and it's like, how do you? There's steps that you have to go through before you're able to target an aircraft like that. There's communication lines that are between the pilot and the country they're flying over. None of that made sense. So again, what you're saying about how does Trump reach the people on the left? First and foremost, the only way to reach the people on the left is to do the exact opposite of how you want them to feel, because they're so fucking deranged that nothing, like Iran could come out the next day and be like, hey, you guys are awesome. We're totally going to sell you oil at a discount. Everything's going to be fine. No peace in the Middle East, and the left will melt down over it.
Yeah.
And so you have to do it in the opposite form.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's what, the Trump discombobulator is something we've been talking about. And when I say I trust him, it's because I believe that, when he's talking about the Venezuela model, that was the signal right from the beginning. And I think the problem with the truth community right now is most people are interpreting the Venezuela model as the military operation story we were told about, right? So when they see Donald Trump say, we're doing the Venezuela model, they're like, nice, go in there, swap out a regime, send the boys in, do whatever needs to be done, glass the desert if you need to, and nip and tuck it, we'll be good. I don't see the Venezuela model that way. I see the Venezuela model as give them the image of a regime change, block the globalist version of the regime change, and then renormalize relations with the host nation. A little bit ago, you mentioned something that I think is very important that very few people understand about color revolutions. You mentioned it in the context of Venezuela. Venezuelans, I had said at the time, are the last people I would ask for an opinion about Nicolas Maduro. And a lot of people in our audience were like, what do you mean? Aren't they the best people to ask? No, they're the last people to ask. Because that would be like going back to 2005 and asking a person who became a Trump supporter 15 years later what they think about the Bush administration.
Yep.
Right? Or alternatively, whatever. What a liberal, you think a Russian is going to get an accurate portrayal or representation of how the American people feel of Donald Trump by selecting an American at random? And if you pick out a liberal, I know a lot of people can say oh, it's the liberals are stupid and everything. It's yeah, sure. Well, the conservatives were stupid from the perspective of a liberal. You mentioned perspective and controlled opposition dynamic. From my perspective, conservatives were obviously being retards for 10 years there. And I think a lot of them still are. Because they're looking at this Iran situation and being like, nice, glass the desert. There's somebody in our chat who just said that. Probably a troll. But either way, that rhetoric is real and it's out there. And I think the Venezuela model was Trump's way of saying, we don't actually want these wars to be real things. We want renormalization. The Trump State Department last week, I've been signaling, put out a press release talking about the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela and Caracas reopening. And in that press release, they said, we are now embarking on a political reconciliation directive. And we're going to see that in Iran. I don't know how much longer this storyline is going to go. I think it's a much more complicated disentanglement, but the whole concept of my show I did 2 weeks ago before GART, the solo show I did, was all about sovereign disentanglement and what I think is going on here. But it is, to your point, it's this irony I feel right now in the truth community where your reaction on February 28th, from the moral perspective, is the correct reaction. It's the correct reaction. If you think Donald Trump is actually getting us into a kinetic hot war that he literally ran on not getting us into, and that was not provoked, by the way, no matter what anybody in the audience wants to say, that's bad. And you should react that way to it. We're the rare people, I think, at Badlands who can say that is the right reaction, but I think Trump is playing a different game, which is why I support him. But I think there's an irony where the Q people and truth community people are attacking anyone who questions what's going on in Iran, and it is giving me flashbacks to the neocon Bush Wars era. Not because I think Donald Trump is doing that, but because, unfortunately, I think he could. And we are seeing that 99% of MAGA would be all in. Of just like, and I don't know, I mean, I don't have a conclusion there, but I thought your perspective would be interesting besides just as a conservative, before I was, but a veteran, of that maybe we actually haven't learned a lot of these things, and Donald Trump is maybe exposing a little bit of that. Like, it's almost like people get more excited when he talks about blitzing Iran than when on Friday he's like, the war's over again. And you almost feel this deflation in people where they're like, all right, well, and then it escalates again on Sunday and people are like, ooh, we might get him this time. I don't know what you think of that, but yeah, you did get attacked, and a lot of us got attacked for that stuff, which I don't think is, I think is crazy that we were being attacked for that.
You hit the nail like smack dab on the top of the head right there. When I saw, like, I sat back, so I do my show on Saturday morning, and I'm like, this is my reaction to it. I said on Saturday morning, the day after, I said, did Israel jump the gun on here? The exact phrase I said, and I played the clip. I said, did Israel Leroy Jenkins this shit in Iran, and Trump had to react? And because if Trump doesn't react, then there actually is an imminent threat to the United States. Because if Israel goes in and bombs Iran without the U.S. involvement, we're still going to be retaliated against, period.
Yeah.
They are going to automatically lump us in to that, into that group right there, and we would be attacked. So that, when Trump says there was an imminent threat, maybe that was the imminent threat.
Yeah, right.
But so, what, and this goes back to the Joe Kent resignation letter. And I don't remember if I said this at GART or not, but I've said this on a few shows where if you read the Joe Kent resignation letter and you cut out the part where he's saying I'm resigning, and you read through that letter, you don't know what his actions are going to be. The way he writes that letter, he says, I think that we jumped the gun on this, but looking back at Donald Trump, this is not who Donald Trump is. This is not what he's represented. This is not what he's gotten our minds out of that warmonger mentality where everybody in the Middle East is automatically our enemy and we need to fight everybody over there. And he brought so many people, myself included, kind of out of that rut, and so quickly we go right back into it. And that was the most depressing thing that I saw coming out of that, is people going out there and claiming that they're MAGA and America first, and we're no new wars, and they were all over that for 10 years with Donald Trump. And then Donald Trump does one thing, and all of a sudden they're like, nuke them motherfuckers, glass the desert, right? And I'm like, man, you guys just completely flip script here. Now, I did immediately say that, Donald Trump, given his track record and given what the results that we've seen from this war, again, 13 KIAs is nothing. That is a training accident in the U.S. military. We've had training accidents with far more people killed than that. And so that's a blessing. But it just doesn't feel like a real war. So Trump is doing or telling us he's doing one thing, but we're just not seeing what we should see as a result of that. Does that make sense?
Totally. And, that brings up another point along the same lines, that I think one of the very strange things to be attacked over is that point that some of us do not believe this war is quote unquote real in the way it's being communicated. and that is a good thing. That is the weird thing. Like, I am saying, I think Donald Trump is disentangling the Western hegemon that the US military has been the kinetic power projection arm of, right? The Western hegemon doesn't just include the US, it's NATO, it's the EU, right? That might be the heart of it. It's Israel, which you just mentioned. Whatever nation you want to put their flag in there. How has the hegemon operated? This is again, there's cognitive dissonance, I think, hitting a lot of truthers because they're pro-Trump, which makes sense, and they think there's a plan, which makes sense. But when you say, guys, the plan might be to tell us the story of a fake war to disarm the real war that was going to occur, which is similar to the point you just made about Israel. I think, just like Trump did this in Venezuela, I think Trump intercepted a regime change in Venezuela that was going to be Maria Corina Machado, National Endowment for Democracy, Nobel Prize. He intercepted that. He blocked it. He put Delcy Rodriguez in, who is what? Just the Maduro regime. And then he does all the deals with her. And I said this the week of Venezuela. I said, watch for, if I'm right about this being an interception, watch for Machado to call for a second regime change, which she did.
Yep.
Right? They wanted Maduro out, and then she goes on Fox News and calls for a second regime change on Rodriguez. But Trump took all the air out of the balloons, which is something Chris Paul said at the time. So look at that. Look at that model with Iran. I think it's a positive take to say, I don't think this war is real. The war is not real. And Lindy, who freaks out in the chat every Sunday night, yes, the war was not provoked. No. I am saying it's not a real war. I am saying Donald Trump is disarming a war, and that if there is coordination here, I think the coordination is between Donald Trump and whoever is going to end up being the new Iranian regime. I happen to agree with you. I wrote an article called Sovereign Disentanglement during the Venezuela op, and in that article, I said Iran is next, and that little Khomeini is going to be the new regime. And that would be a marker, a retroactive marker, that we didn't swap out a regime. We gave the regime a new story, and we're going to be friends with them now. Now, will that happen? We don't know, right? He might be a fake and gay phantom Ayatollah. He might be very real. But there's a lot of this strange cognitive dissonance, I think, right now in the truth community, where people are cheering on Trump, but I think they're cheering on the mainstream media image of Trump, yep, which is not the real version of Trump, right? Like, Trump, I've seen so many people, even our audience, be like, man, Trump's really putting the screws to China and Russia. And it's like, really? How's he putting the screws to China? Is it by getting the Iranians to settle oil trade in yuan? Or is it by unsanctioning the Russian oil that they're now selling to China to help them deal with the energy crisis? How exactly is Donald Trump putting the screws to Russia and China? But I don't know. It's a ramble, but
so the China thing is interesting because this war does, this quote unquote war does adversely affect China. China is getting, they're no longer going to be able to pick up that sanctioned Iranian oil, for 20% discount, whatever they were selling it for. I think I read somewhere that they were buying that sanctioned oil about $15 a barrel cheaper than the market rate for it. So that is going to have some impact on them, at least in the short term. Right. I don't know about the long term, but the point you made about Venezuela was absolutely fascinating because, the whole idea that Trump goes in there to try and get ahead of the regime change that was being orchestrated. And they've been planning regime change in Venezuela for a long time.
Oh yeah.
I think this whole election fraud thing, Ash and I are doing Stolen Elections, the book on Badlands Book Club. And it's atrocious. It's one of the worst written books I've ever read. And I'm disappointed because I just found out the last episode that I'm cited as a source in the book. And so I get to the back of the book and there's my name under the sources. And I'm like, well, they didn't cite me for any of the Venezuela shit. But did you see, and that narrative is out there as well to make us think Maduro's stealing elections around the world.
Right. It's all come back. It was all Maduro the whole time, right? Every assault on democracy around the world has been Maduro.
It's the worst election rigging you could ever imagine, because there's not a favorable nation in the world that they're alleging has had their elections rigged by Venezuela that has leadership that's favorable to Venezuela. So they'd be rigging elections in foreign countries to put in leadership that is not favorable to them. But to the point with the CIA op, in the lead up to that operation that Trump, conducted down there, for the first time, I think, in ever, a president comes out and tells us the CIA is operating in Venezuela.
Yep.
Right. He says this publicly.
Right.
And then after that, we get this story that the Navy SEALs are on the ground in Venezuela targeting buildings, and the CIA is operating drones and taking these buildings out. That's in reverse. Right. And I made sure that I'm getting this right. It should, the other way around, right? It should be the CIA is giving the intel that these buildings need to be hit, and the Navy SEALs are going in and on the ground blowing it up. And instead we get this narrative that it's, this story that it's in reverse. Again, was Trump putting that out there in order to say, hey, look, they're getting ready to move on the Maduro regime. Machado is their girl. That is who they want in there. And so we're gonna jump the gun on this deep state operation, and we're gonna go in there ahead of time. I was listening to somebody the other day that's like, Maduro was out there saying, come and get me, come and get me, come and get me. And Trump was like, ha ha ha, watch this, and came and got him, thinking like Trump was like calling his bluff. No. That was Maduro literally crying out to Trump and saying,
yeah, bro, dude. And Ghost, like we've all nailed like something specific over the last few years. Ghost called that a year in advance.
He did.
Ghost said Trump was going to grab Maduro in a special operation, a special military operation, and bring him to the U.S. to turn state's evidence, and that we were going to be told there was a regime change there. And he even floated Delcy Rodriguez as his replacement. But I think Ghost, and you guys can check with him, I think he thought that was going to be too obvious with Delcy, so that they wouldn't do that. But it turns out I think they are trying to make it as obvious as possible. But, as the part of the whole theme of this episode is, apparently it's not obvious enough, because there's a lot of truthers who are like, we totally got those Venezuelans down there, and now we're getting them Iranians. But yeah, man, it absolutely felt like a swap out. I called it a burn card. It's one of the terminologies I've been using, is that, these color revolutions, they are designed to, in keeping with the theme of this show, color revolutions are mostly narrative until they are actual, right? A color revolution, whether you think it's good or bad, is designed to do what CannCon has been, the word you've been using all night, destabilize a given country. And what are they really destabilizing? They're destabilizing the faith of the people in that country's current leadership. And how do they do that? The very broad macro way that the intel, usually US intel or British intel to your point, or Israeli intel, does this is by making life very difficult on the people of a given nation, and then engineering media stories, including a populist uprising within said nation, that frames all of the issues they're dealing with as the fault of the current regime. And if you guys want an example of where this has been done over the last 10 years, I would present to you the United States of America. What do you think the BLM, the election fraud of 2020, the No Kings, pick your deployment that we've been covering for 10 fucking years, and for 4 or 5 on Badlands, you for longer than that. That is a color revolution, right? That's not controversial to say. Well, again, that's why you can't pick an American out of a lineup who has been the subject of the clip John plays about Donald Trump from a couple years ago. He plays it all the time. The clip where Trump says, the American people have been subject to illegal psychological warfare operations for years. Who was doing that? United States intelligence. US Intel was the ones conducting a color revolution on you. And that's why when the people in the truth community should know that. They do know that. That's why they're in the truth community. If you don't know that you've been subject to a color revolution against Donald Trump, you would just be a normal Republican. Why would you even be here? Why would you be talking about stolen elections and the rest of it? And I think there's an opportunity here with Venezuela and with Iran to understand, oh shit, is Donald Trump untangling color revolutions in these places the same way you all have woken up to a color revolution here? And I don't pretend to know exactly what's going on over there, but man, you can map these things in advance and just say, if we do end up with totally normalized and let's just say positive, really positive, mutually beneficial dealings with Iran this year, whenever that happens, is it realistic to imagine that we have this super hot war with them and then that paradigm emerges on the back of it? Or is it more likely that you were told the story of some extremely dramatic war in order to get us to that point?
That is absolutely fascinating. To the point with the color revolutions, and you mentioned earlier that the last person you want to talk to is somebody that's on the ground living through one of these, and that's because they are very good at what they do. And you're going to see, so when this guy that I was talking to says, people were getting shot by the National Guard in Venezuela. Well, why were they being shot by the National Guard in Venezuela? Well, because there was riots. Well, why were there riots? Because nobody could get any food. Why couldn't you get any food? Because we couldn't get any food because there was sanctions on imports into Venezuela, and we couldn't get trade and all these other things. And this is going much more political here in terms of the explanation, but that is the whole point, and that's how you orchestrate. If you've never read, and I don't know if you've read it, but Tales of an Economic Hitman.
No, I have heard of that though.
It shows you how economics, and the same way Trump is using the economy as a weapon, right? To keep away from war. It tells you how the intelligence community, and not just the intelligence community, a lot of this is done through NGOs, right? The NGOs, which are essentially quasi-intelligence,
Right.
but these NGOs are able to do it freely, government funded, grants and everything else, and go in and pull off these operations and destabilize these regions, and people have no idea. They have no idea what is causing this. They just know that he's the man in power while this is happening, so he's
Exactly.
bad. So he's bad. And that's the same thing we see, I would love to see, instead of the war narrative that we have to see right now roll out in Iran, I would like them to just say, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to give you a clean slate, no sanctions. We're going to open up trade with you. All right. But I'm telling you this one time, and this is something Trump can do because he has a position of power when he speaks. You fuck with us, we're going to fuck you up. But let's shake hands, let bygones be bygones, and let's see what's going to happen as a result of this. Maybe the war narrative that we're seeing right now. And remember, there's only 2% of Iranians right now, allegedly, that have internet. Right. So the stories are not getting out from inside of Iran. We have no idea what the hell is actually going on in Iran other than what we're told by the talking heads on the Fox News and the CNNs and everything else. So, I mean, that's kind of where I want to see this go. And I think there's a very real possibility that that's actually what Trump is doing with this. I mean, Kushner's intimately involved, Witkoff, JD Vance, Trump himself involved. That very well could be what's actually happening here, while at the same time satisfying the Lindsey Grahams of the world that want to see, a full-blown fucking war.
Yeah, Trump has to operate in multiple battle spaces, right?
Yes.
He's got to, the infamous Rich Higgins memo that, again, John has brought up on the Power Hour going back since he started it. Donald Trump operates from the battle space that the enemy has set. And I totally agree with you. People wonder, why do you think he's telling stories then that don't conform to what he's actually doing? Well, because if he told those stories, nobody would believe them, and he would lose the public mandate to do the things that need to be done here. So I do agree with you that he's essentially wearing the mask of a neocon right now to disarm the neocon war machine. And that sets us up. You also set us up for our next discussion point, which is all about how that color revolution in the United States was consummated, how it peaked in 2020, which is what you've been talking about the most for several years, and perhaps in the context of this Iran war, how that color revolution is very much still going on in the US. So I want to talk about that, but I want to hit a couple of sponsors. And the first one is ourselves and J-Triot's mom.
In a quiet town where beards grow wild and lips dare to crack without permission, one woman has suffered.
Hi, I'm Margie, and I'm J-Triot's mother.
But the world would come to know her by another name, Madame Margie, the moistureless.
Jay came home with a lip balm. It's called Soft Disclosure.
With one miraculous application, her power awakened.
Within one day, my lips were healed. It was miraculous.
But salvation came at a cost. For in the shadowed lands known only as Badlands,
You boys at Badlands are so handsome.
she saw potential,
You're covering up your beautiful faces.
and she made her demand,
Shave them all off,
or face the consequences. Beard oil will not save you now.
and you'll look so much better.
This summer, moisturize wisely and guard your beard, because Madame Margie, the moistureless, is always watching.
If that does not sell you soft disclosure, nothing can sell you soft disclosure. I do use it. I'm sure Brian uses it on that luscious beard of his. Baby Bright got a kick out of Brian in Nashville. It was funny. I was like, apparently my own animus toward people doesn't automatically transfer to my son. But we are also brought to you by our friends at Rumble, specifically something that's actually relevant to a rant we got tonight, and that is the Rumble wallet. Here's a little inside scoop that many creators are talking about behind the scenes. It's actually one of the reasons we use Rumble. They made a way to super chat creators so we get paid immediately and without any fees. YouTube and Twitch take up to 50% when you tip creators, and this method takes none. That's right, the platform takes 0 fees. We keep 100% of what you send over. You can super chat with Bitcoin, Tether USD, or even Tether Gold stablecoins. The tip will show up directly in our Rumble chat, which we will read. All you need to do is download the Rumble wallet on the App Store and send the tips to your favorite creators. You can do that at wallet.rumble.com, or you can download the app directly from the App Store. It's an amazing way to get rid of the middleman and help the creator economy. And shout out to Rumble for making this disruptive technology, both in streaming and in finance. And we actually got a tip tonight in the middle of the show from Gadget Goo for $10 USD, but it was actually for something like 13,000 sats, who used Rumble Wallet and said hockey fans are the best. So thank you to Rumble Wallet, and thank you to Gadget Goo for using the Rumble Wallet to tip us. And all right, back to this. So we're talking about color revolutions. Your main subject matter since starting all this and before Badlands is election fraud, right? It seemed, well, let's nail down that, and then we can get into color revolution in terms of the Iran war. But why did you become so focused on election fraud? And why are you still so focused on election fraud, considering how many, once you get into the truth community and the awakening stuff, like you can go down 1,000 rabbit holes, right? Like we all have, of what needs to be fixed and what's really going on in the world and how can we make it better. You have stayed pretty focused on that as your primary issue of choice. And I wondered just why that is and how that has evolved since you first kind of got obsessed with it.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, though, it's the most important thing we do in our society as an American citizen, right? In terms of, for the general good of the population, voting is the most important thing that we do, and in a free and fair election. Now, again, following the 2020 election, or prior to, much like with my then allegiance to George Bush and my respect for him at the time, my opinion on voting changed as well. I live in Broward County, which is the Hanging Chad from 2000. So we got a taste of that.
It was destiny.
Well, we got a taste of that in 2000, and I'd never seen anything like what I saw on November 3rd, 2020, when I went to bed. And I didn't go to bed. I fell asleep on the couch, and I wake up and there's still no definitive winner. And, I can remember elections before playing drinking games,
Yeah.
for elections. We would play drinking games. I was in my teens, 20s, well, 20s for legal purposes, we'll say 20s.
Right.
But it was like, I've never seen anything like this. And so then, I start digging into it a little bit, and I'm like, okay, this doesn't make much sense. And I honestly, I don't know. I started reading everything I could about elections. I started reading everything in the news about what they were saying. I started listening to everything. I was listening to press conferences that elected officials, quote unquote, elected officials were putting on and everything. And I think the thing that really made me stick by this is how I saw the censorship start to kick in. And when I saw that, I was like, we are destined. And this was in addition to COVID. I also would, lump COVID into the censorship regime back then. So when I saw that, I was like, fuck, something is up here. I got to stay on this. And it's one of the hardest things for people to understand, because they all believe that we do elect this, because, they tell us, right? They tell us, hey, this person got 3,578,174 votes. And it's like, how the fuck could they know that if it was fake? And there's no verification process whatsoever. There's no validation for you as an American citizen. There's no way for you to ensure that that's accurate. And so once you see that, you can't unsee it. Now, what I've seen since then has been the continuation of the regurgitation of those same narrative talking points, those same regime points, right? No evidence of widespread fraud, right? I just got done reading a report for the Fulton County stuff. The folks that submitted the evidence or submitted the report that ended up becoming a part of that FBI complaint in Fulton County to get that warrant. I mean, those people are friends of mine. Those are people that I talk to very often. And so when I saw the report that Stephen Richer put out in response, Stephen Richer, Ryan Macias, and another guy that I've never heard of, I think John Grimmer, I think is his name. I started reading this report, and I'm like, this is a 58-page report that nobody's going to read. They're going to read the executive summary on this report, and they're going to see that there's absolutely nothing, or they're not going to see that the report itself contains absolutely nothing in terms of an investigation, any work that they did to validate or invalidate. They clearly went at this with a specific agenda of discrediting the claims that were made, not deciding whether the claims were valid or invalid, but to discredit them. And when I saw that, I had just gotten done, me and Ash had just gotten done interviewing Stephen Richer like 3 months before that. And in that interview, I went back and listened to it again yesterday. In that interview, Stephen Richer did not know whether, remember the Federalist paper that came out, the story, 315,000 votes that have no signs on the poll tapes. That story came out. When Stephen Richer was talking to us on Why We Vote 3 months ago, back in late December, early January, 4 months ago at the time, he did not know whether it was zero tapes or closing tapes that the Federalist was talking about, and that were missing these signatures. He completely butchered that over and over again. And so the whole reason I bring this up, and again, I had Kevin Moncla on that show, who's one of the guys that drafted that report. Stephen Richer either would have had to go like straight laser focus on this to get this report, enough information about this to write this report in a 3 or 4 month period, or he just put his name on there because he's the guy that has a little bit of credibility because he's the Republican from Maricopa County that was an elected official, and so people will trust him. So the whole thing's fucking bullshit, and I just can't stop on it, because if we let them win this battle, we lose the country. It's gone.
Well, and I think, and I like how you frame these things, because you're somebody who's focused on election fraud for years. Obviously, at Badlands, there are some here who have controversial takes on voting and all the rest of it. Chris Paul comes to mind, of course. Alpha and him had a spirited debate, which I think was good in Nashville. Now, so I'm not asking what we should do about whether or not we should vote. I think that's deeply personal. I'm not really that interested in litigating it. But more to the point you just ended on is that it's bullshit, and we've got to focus on this. I take away from that you are talking about the election system and the problem of election fraud, right? And I think that is what gets lost in this debate of voting and you should vote harder and Trump told you to vote, etc. Again, whether or not you in the chat or as an American think you should vote to help Trump overwhelm the fraud, or whether you think you should abstain and call for a canceled election like somebody like Chris Paul talks about, that's beside the point to me. What I was trying to express to some people in Nashville we had good conversations, a lot of the Badlanders there. I was actually very pleasantly surprised. Very little vitriol was coming out of people there against Chris, even ones that disagreed with him, which is not the case from a couple of years ago. There was like a lot of vitriol in Myrtle Beach when he was advancing this rhetoric in 2024. And that was good to see, but I'd said I think people are still misunderstanding a stance like that. I think they think that Chris doesn't care about elections, when to me the entire purpose of his stance is what you just said, is saying we need to focus on this issue and only this issue, and that issue being our elections are fraudulent. We all agree on that. The question is, how fraudulent are they? Chris would make the argument that it's a binary. You either have legitimate elections or you have fraudulent elections. It sounds like you agree with that. And, I want to transition this more into the context of the current state of MAGA and InfoWar media, the media personalities. And you've been in, and the audiences. You've been in this a lot longer than I have. You were in the YouTube days. You've been doing this stuff for quite a long time, talking about election fraud since 2020. What do you see as the current state of rhetoric within MAGA about election fraud, and whether or not it's this big thing we have to deal with, compared to when you first got into this and started banging the drum on that?
So the good thing, I think MAGA, after the 2020 election, I think everybody knew something was up. And I don't think the problem has ever necessarily been with proving whether or not there was election fraud within MAGA. The problem with the MAGA movement, in my opinion, in terms of the election fraud aspect, is a lot of them got complacent because Trump won. And they're like, okay, we fixed the system. Now Trump's going to come in and fix it. It's still not fixed. And do I have faith that Trump is going to do it? I have faith that he's going to do everything he can to do it. The problem is I don't know what he's going to be able to do, right? These EOs keep getting slapped down. He's the president. He's not a legislator. He's not in the legislation. So it's limited there. Now, but going back to your point with MAGA, I think everybody does understand that. Now, what we're noticing now, and this is one of the reasons why Ash and I decided to do that book, is now that there's a consensus within MAGA and even in the Republican Party as a whole, and even a lot of Democrats, the Democrats are, if we're to believe polls, around 30 to 40% believe that fraud impacted the outcome of the 2020 election. Like that is a huge narrative shift compared to 2021 when, these retards were screaming at us, just move on, just move on.
Right.
And so now what we've seen is this kind of deployment that it's outside influence. And I don't think it is. Like, could it be? Yes, there absolutely could be outside influence into our, over our elections. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but from all the, the stuff that I've researched, the work that I've done, the reports that I've read, the stories that I've written, that's all organic. That's all stuff that's happening within the United States. And this is all being, kind of promulgated by NGOs, right? These NGOs that are receiving the same NGOs that destabilize other nations. If it has something like democracy in its name, it's probably fucking intelligence. And
that's a reverse indicator.
Yeah. You should probably have nothing to do with it. Protect democracy. States United was the organization that just put this out. Like, anytime you see an NGO that has a name like that, run the other direction. Nobody's
absolutely
donating money to them. Go ahead.
Dude, it's a great point, and it perfectly leads to where I kind of wanted to take this, which kind of ends up looping back to how we started, which is talking about Iran, talking about Venezuela and color revolutions. And you mentioned, the situation down in Venezuela, the narratives leading into Venezuela. You mentioned were largely connecting U.S. election fraud to the Maduro regime and the Venezuelan regime and all that. And another side to further the point you just made. I had mentioned this earlier in the show, but just to dig a little further into it, the reason I had flagged Maria Corina Machado as the baddie in Venezuela, or the symbol, the front of the baddies, was A, she was backed by the National Endowment for Democracy, an NGO with the word democracy in it. So NGO is one mark against you, and you're absolutely right that NGO with the word democracy in it is Deep State Central. Like, those are deep state staging grounds, nationally and usually internationally, for the U.S. hegemon, U.S. intelligence, globalist intelligence. Second point was, let me look this up to get the name right. Maria Corina Machado was also involved in...
she tried to overthrow. You're talking about when she tried to overthrow the government and they had a 10-day coup?
Yeah, I'm looking for the name of the organization she was with. I can't find it right now. Sumate. That's exactly it. So Maria Corina Machado founded or was involved in the prime NGO-funded election fraud detection service, or put another way, election integrity arm of Venezuela, right? So Maria Corina Machado was funded by Western intelligence directly, and she had a nonprofit that was focused on election integrity. And I'm sure you would agree in all of your research that in addition to the point you made about NGOs and democracy being reverse indicators, if you are a government organization that is called election integrity, or that has that in your mission statement, you might not be trying to make our elections or give integrity to our elections. You might be trying to protect the integrity of elections. And one more point before I hand it back to you. Sometimes I go on my spurgouts about etymology and the origins and true meaning of words. And I know sometimes I'm reading too much into things. But a lot of people in this audience understand that if we are dealing with a satanic sort of inversion cabal that's kind of at the heart of this deep state globalist network that we all talk about, one of the things that a lot of people in our audience understand is that they use inversion and they use humiliation and they use these public rituals, right? And what is one of the main rituals they use? They tell you what they're doing to you. So what is another word or definition for integrity? Strength. Another synonym for the word integrity is fortification. Does that remind you of a famous article from several years ago about how they weren't stealing the election, they were fortifying the election?
Yep.
So this is one of the ways I say they don't actually lie to you all in the way that you think they're lying to you. She didn't say she was trying to bring honest elections to the Venezuelan people. She said she was running an election integrity outfit because she was trying to fortify the Venezuelan election system, which is fraudulent. And like, that's, I think, a lot of the framing that you've dealt with for years, that these people say, no, we didn't say we're bringing you open and transparent elections. We're strengthening them and defending them from you.
Right. Machado also, I think it was around like 2002, I think, was involved in the Carmona decree. And this was a literal 2-day long coup where they overthrew the Chavez regime and abolished the National Assembly temporarily. It didn't last. But, that is, a testament to where Machado is, where her intentions are going. And of course, you can all go back and look. She is a Yale educated. She came over here and participated in the globalist seminar at Yale. I think it's like a 6-month indoctrination camp where they teach you how to be a good little Western coup orchestrator, color revolutionist. She's got pictures of her in the White House back in the day with George Bush. She was actually pretty attractive back then, by the way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen that picture. She was a very good looking woman.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the same. I mean, this is the same thing they rolled out in Ukraine, right? Me and JB got into this at GART, right? Because he was talking about, well, yeah, if we overthrow a government that's favorable to Russia, then sure,
right. Regime change is a good thing. Yeah, exactly.
Regime change is a good thing if you're overthrowing a government that is favorable to Russia, and it's like, no, never. Like, we have to have our sovereignty. But to the point with Venezuela and the op that's being orchestrated on or being thrust on the American people right now, especially MAGA, and it's died down a little bit, is the Venezuela's rigging all the elections. They rigged our election. They've been rigging elections for years and years and years. There's a former CIA spook that's going out there and talking about this, a former DEA asset that is probably a spook as well, that's going out there and saying this. And they linked up with a New York Times author to publish this book saying all of this stuff that can be debunked with not all of it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that book that's true, but the narrative they're trying to put out, the assigning the responsibility for the operation to specifically Venezuelans and a handful of Venezuelans, ignoring the globalist control that Smartmatic has become, right? Smartmatic was bought out in 2014, essentially, was bought out by SGO Corp, which is Lord Malik Brown, Open Society, George Soros, right? Sir Nigel Knowles, another oligarch in London. A bunch of oligarchs from London now own that business. And that is when 2014 is when all of this began to take place. Sure, they might have been rigging elections in Venezuela before that. I don't believe that necessarily, but I think elections across the entire globe are probably manipulated at some level because there's not enough interest. Not every country has had that glaring, charismatic, once in a lifetime, once in a millennium figure like Donald Trump come out and then get beat by that bag of wet socks, Joe Biden, right? The fucking retard that didn't know what he was.
That's our boy Blue. He was the best fake president we've ever had.
They had to roll him out, man.
Yep.
And so that is, to me, that is telling me that we are very close to being over the target in terms of elections and getting something done on this, that the people that, may or may not have, well, I don't think they were involved in it, but they represent agencies that I do believe were involved in it. And now all of a sudden, I mean, I got a phone call from the author. The author of that book called me to talk to me and did not know what the fuck he was talking about. Like I literally said, I think CIA has been rigging elections. And he said, yes, and then like 5 minutes later in the conversation, I said, well, you acknowledge the CIA has been rigging. I never said that. Ash was on the phone with me. She heard it. So it's really fascinating to watch all of this play out and the desperation that they're getting. And I think a lot of this does have to do with what President Trump did, cutting off USAID and National Endowment funding. I think that was a driving force with a lot of this. And, even though the systems are still in place, they still require money and assets to be able to run. And Trump is doing a pretty damn good job at dismantling that system. So
that's the actual side of the dismantling of the election fraud system that I do agree and have faith that Donald Trump is going to do whatever is in his power to untangle that and disarm it. Now, is he going to do that before the 2026 midterms? I have my strong doubts. But I want to focus on the narrative of that. Mm-hmm. And again, this has been a theme specifically to my earlier question. There's framing we throw around a lot, conning, whatever you want to call them. The concerning thing to somebody like me about the response to Chris Paul's rhetoric is that it is very hard to distinguish the response to that rhetoric from the very people in what we call Con Inc. now who said all of this stuff in 2022. I'm not going to name the names. You guys all know the names. They're all the usual suspects who have had all their millions of followers and never got banned from anything. And they all went all in on the DeSantis operation in 2022, they all said that Donald Trump was the reason that the Republican Party lost seats in those midterms. And all of them unified, all of those supposed MAGA voices unified in saying that Donald Trump had announced his candidacy for 2024 too early. And my theory on that is that he rug pulled, speaking of interceptions, he rug pulled the DeSantis announcement, right? Because DeSantis was supposed to announce in January too early. And then if Trump announced after him, they were going to accuse Trump of doing what? Disrupting unity.
Yep.
And what does everybody say Badlands does around here, CannCon? We're just those unity disruptors, right? So I wonder what you think of this, specifically in light of the election fraud narrative. We don't know whether or not these things are going to be fixed before the 2026 midterms, but in terms of the rhetoric in Con Inc. and in these supposed Trump favorable voices, it seems to me that there's a lot of people in that sphere. Alpha has become one of them, unfortunately. I know everybody loves him, and I love Alpha too. I just think he's being retarded right now. His rhetoric is indistinguishable from like Benny Johnson, completely indistinguishable, because they're basically the narrative right now is if we do not win the midterms, we're doomed. And I would argue that you might just be defending a fraudulent election system by forwarding that stance. But you've been in this longer. You've dealt with those voices a lot longer than me. I wonder how you see 2022 versus right now.
So to Chris, to the point you were making about Chris Paul saying, you know, the voting thing and that whole debate between Alpha. I was on that panel. I was kind of the guy that in the middle that just shut up the whole time and was like, I'm not getting involved in this because I can understand both points on that. But I'm
being tongue-in-cheek, people, about Alpha. I've had him on the show a bunch of times. You guys know.
We love Alpha. You know, to the point that Chris was making, and this is where John Drake came in pretty clutch in this and saying, you know, if you're voting, you're consenting to the system, right? And I understand that. I agree with that. I think the system's there no matter what, whether you vote or not. But by voting, you are actually acknowledging it and saying, I want to take part in the system. You are, you know, it doesn't matter if you vote or not. You're still going to have to take part in the system. If you live in these United States, you're going to have to take part in the system. But to what Chris Paul is saying is that by not voting, you are essentially checking out of that system. You are saying, I am not going to, or excuse me, what John Drake's point is, I'm not going to consent to this system. When you see these people like, you know, the influencers with millions of views that went all DeSantard earlier on, when you see those people saying, hey, this is dangerous rhetoric. Well, okay, so two things can be true here. One, they can genuinely believe that elections really aren't rigged and that everybody needs to vote because we need the most number of people going to the polls on that day to get our Republican across the line. Maybe. Or they know that by not voting, you are checking out of that system. You are stepping out of that system, and they need you in that system. They need you to participate in that system. Now, I think my take on that is that you can participate in that system and still participate as a rebellion, right? You can participate it as a rebuke of the system. That's what voting is fundamentally supposed to be. If you don't like something, you go to the ballot box and change it. And so I'm going to continue doing that. It's only going to take, you know, an hour out of my day on, you know, the first Tuesday in November after the first Monday. No problem. But I can totally get Chris Paul's point on that. Now, in compare, like as far as 2026 goes, every fucking election, BB, man, we hear this is the most important election of our lifetime. If we don't fix it here, we're all gonna fucking die. And it's like, you guys are so retarded. Now, what I will say, this one is slightly different because it is potentially our last election with Donald Trump involved in it. I mean, he's not on the ticket, but he's involved in this. And would I like to see President Trump get fighters in Congress, especially in the primaries? And that's the key right there, is the primaries. The establishment, once we get to the general election, that means fucking nothing. That means absolutely nothing. That means that
it's just red blue by that point. Yeah,
exactly. It's red blue, and they're the same thing. Everybody's colorblind. In reality, they say red blue. BB's literally colorblind. Remember that shit in Cocoa Beach?
Did
That was
I not see? Oh, yeah.
Remember
Right.
Jackie's phone? You couldn't see like the phone. All you saw was a red.
Allegedly, that could have been a psyop. How am I
No,
supposed to know?
that was not a psyop, man. We
Yeah.
filmed it. We filmed it from another phone. But anyways,
That's why I don't get caught into this election stuff like you people. It's all the color coding doesn't work on me.
Well, yeah, and the last thing I'll say, my point is that like the dooming out over what's going to happen in 2026, guys. If we lose the House in 2026, it's not going to be any different than it was in 2018 when we lost the House in 2018, or when we didn't have the House in 2020. It's all fucking stupid. What I am really excited about is when we do finally get these elections squared away and we actually get representation that represents us and not just the establishment, status quo.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And besides and that's why I try not to focus as much personally on, when that's going to happen, just because we can't control it, right? We don't know. So we can't control most of these things. But I really focus a lot, in addition to focusing on the narrative, I de facto focus on the storytellers. I focus on the people with big megaphones, not just politicians, but media members, and certainly media apparatus. And that's more what I'm signaling in 2026. And I think it's part of what Chris Paul talks about as well when he's not talking about the election system specifically. It's like, I think it is concerning when your rhetoric, even if earnest, about vote, is potentially lending a lot of power to the narrative that these anti-Trump fake MAGA voices are forwarding. You made a good point about I totally get what you're saying about participating like a conscientious objector, basically. I voted in 2024. I still believed these things, but voted. I don't know about 2026. Like, I've never liked midterm. I don't even like the idea of it. I hate the way the whole system works. I hate the primaries type of thing. Same type of thing with presidential elections. But I voted for Donald Trump, and that was more symbolic for me. I didn't have any faith that my vote mattered in any meaningful way, especially in Massachusetts. But I still did it. Would probably do so again in 2028. But more so, I think if you're looking for the threat of why is it threatening to go all in to the point you just made of like, this is the most important election ever. This is the most important midterms ever. I think the more credence we as a Trump and MAGA movement lend to that narrative, that I think is a color revolution. I think that is part of the color revolution. And people go, well, why? Why would like supporting voting for pro-Trump voices in the 2026 midterms be forwarding a color revolution against him? Well, what if they don't win? They are already starting. What if we are told in a fraudulent election system that they don't win? I'll tell you what happens, because they did it in 2022. All of these voices will say Donald Trump is the reason that we lost. The Republican Party is weaker now. The MAGA movement is weaker now. And the proof that the MAGA movement is weaker is the result of this unverifiable and largely fraudulent election system that a lot of you are telling us to support and to stop undermining by voting really hard in it. Well, if we all vote really hard in it and then we are told we lose, I think you've lost a lot of ability and power to call a system fraudulent if you lose, right? It's sort of like you said about the Democrats, quote unquote, in 2020. That's the stance they were using. It's like, hey, we won, so the elections are real. We lose, the elections are fake. That's how it goes. Well, you don't want to start playing that game if you're the people that called 2020 fake. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are playing that game. So that's the concerning thing, regardless of whether you think participation is right or wrong. It's concerning to me that a lot of these supposedly MAGA media figures and large influencers and everything, they're the ones banging the drum on voting really hard more than anybody else. Yep. And, I guess the secondary, I'd want your response to that with the media figures in particular. And secondly, if Donald Trump is aware of all these things we're talking about, including the media figures that are undermining him using the election system, what do you think his plan is in terms of the narrative? Not in terms of the actuals of the election system, but why doesn't he seem freaked out about that? He does seem comfortable even though he probably knows these people are trying to undermine him in the media.
That's a great question, and that is one of the things. I mean, obviously he's the leader of this movement, and you have to have, what's the old expression about a duck? Like calm and peaceful on the surface, but kicking like hell underneath.
Oh yeah.
And that is actually going on right now. I mean, you saw Kash Patel come out on today, actually this morning, and say, we're looking at the evidence we got out of Fulton County, and we're there's going to be some arrests. Now, are we going to see arrests? Who knows?
Right.
But the whole concept, BB, this is something another thing I talked about at GART. The whole concept of, and what you said, I don't particularly like the midterms. You said, I'm with you on that, and the reason for that is because even if the midterms themselves were legit, like elections in general, even if they were legit, the idea that you're going to go and elect a man like President Trump in 2024, well, first in 2016, but then again in 2024, because you fundamentally want to change a system. And then you're going to, that's what the consensus was. I mean, President Trump got the first Republican to win the popular vote in this last election since, I think, like maybe Bush's first term in 2000 or I think maybe then. So he goes off and pulls that out. The mandate is crystal clear, right? And so now you give him, he's got 2 years, right? He's got 2 years to go through and root out a bureaucracy that is so fucking deeply rooted in DC that you don't even know how deep it goes, right? Does it end at these institutions, the DHS? Does it end at the FBI? Does it end at the CIA? Does it end at the DOJ? Or how much deeper does it go beyond that? How much? I mean, you just saw Pam Bondi left, right? And you saw Pam Bondi, and I can't remember who the guy, the J6er that was a senior advisor to Ed Martin in the weaponization group, he left as well. And then you just saw Lyons, Todd Lyons, the DHS secretary, acting secretary, because we haven't had an actual secretary since 2017. Senate confirmed DHS secretary since 2017. You see those three leave. And what did they all three tell us? We can do more in the private sector. And when you think about how deep this rot actually goes, the public-private partnerships that we formed with these bureaucracies, where these bureaucratic institutions feed these NGOs. They feed them. Oh, you need a grant? Well, sure, we'll give you a grant. Here's $2 billion. Oh, by the way, the president of your NGO is the former, so-and-so that was in this administration, that worked in this same exact establishment for 15, 20 years. They know how this works, and they're able to effectuate whatever they want, whatever policy they want. They're able to do it through that NGO. And you're expecting, and this isn't exclusive to President Trump, but you're expecting somebody to come in 2 years and fix that? That is the fundamental problem in this country. The problem is not we don't have enough Republicans in the House. No, the problem is we have deep state swamp motherfuckers that are in these bureaucracies for decades, and we can't get rid of them. And Trump has gone on the warpath trying to get rid of them for the last year and a half since he took office. And you get just pushback after pushback after pushback. It's absurd. It is a fundamentally broken system because he wasn't able to accomplish this by himself in 2 years. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to elect a complete, and this happens to every president.
Yeah.
They lose the House, right? They get the House in a mandate. They lose it in 2 years. And now it's somebody else that comes in there. And now all of a sudden the system is just going to it protects itself. And it's all through rigged elections, man.
Man, very well said. And as we get toward an ending here, I think that's a great that sums up a lot of how I feel about midterms in general, right? There are some people, Chris might be one of these, who says like participation in any of these elections is a bit of a humiliation ritual. I'm not gonna argue with that, but I absolutely feel that participating in the midterms is a humiliation ritual. And I agree exactly how you framed it. That is leaving aside the legitimacy of the elections themselves, because the bottom line is I didn't elect or throw my weight behind, none of us as sovereigns through our power behind Donald Trump and our faith behind Donald Trump because we really like Republicans in Congress, right? Like, to your point, to your exact point, we want him to fuck the system up.
Yes.
We want him to drain the system. And if you were to poll, this is one, speaking of polls you mentioned earlier, if you were to honestly poll a bipartisan American audience, what is the one institution everyone can agree is corrupt to its core? United States Congress. United States Congress beats the IRS in American, in lack of trust among the American people. There are three institutions in the American public, and these numbers might fluctuate back and forth, that have the least trust among the American public: the IRS, the media, the mainstream media, and Congress. And Congress is usually in last place. And to everything you just said there, to put a bow on it, did you, whoever you are out there, did you elect Donald Trump to restore faith in Congress, to restore faith in Washington, D.C., to restore faith in the swamp? That's not what I want him there for. And that's why it actually kind of goes back full circle to our Iran discussion, where you and I both had a similar reaction at the beginning, while both trusting Donald Trump and believing his intentions are not to get us into a new forever war in the Middle East. I apply a lot of that framing to the US election system in the midterms and beyond and say, I can understand why Trump is telling people to vote and like endorsing Lindsey Graham and playing this kind of game, while also looking at his actual moves. And one of the kind of white pills on this whole discussion for me is, given that Donald Trump is basically leading by executive order, and are you guys seeing a lot of headlines in the last year and a half that Donald Trump is working with Congress?
No, very few.
I mean, don't we control Congress right now? I'm told that we control Congress. Why is it that Congress doesn't seem to be doing anything Donald Trump wants, and that he has to lean on them every single month to do something that he wants, and that when they inevitably don't do the thing he wants in the way he wants it, he signs an executive order to circumvent them? That the court system, by the way, the third branch that we're supposed to trust very much, immediately tries to block?
Yep.
So, of the three branches of government right now, which one of them seems to be representing the will of the American people? And which two seem to be diametrically opposed to that branch that we supposedly control right now? So that I think it's great how you frame that, and it's a different way of attacking this election argument of saying, like, let's stop arguing about the election system for a second and just say, do you feel represented by Congress or not? And maybe that's a bigger discussion that we need to have, but that maybe we're not ready for it. And maybe to the comfy point and the duck underwater point you made, maybe that's part of why Donald Trump isn't actually that worried, because he seems to kind of be putting a framework together of leading the American people without really needing certain things to happen in these midterms.
You could be spot on with that, and that would go back to what he said, where he said, I only need you to vote for me this one time. I don't need you after that. Right. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know. What sparks that? Like, what kind of uprising, what kind of chaos has to come about from that? But I mean, I think, ultimately, realistically, I think, he's going to continue fighting through the executive orders and trying to get the Congress to actually fucking do something. The SAVE Act, to your point you were making earlier, 83% approval, 86% approval, and they won't do shit about it, But yeah, I think that's a spot on point, man. Like, Congress has been wildly ineffective. The Swalwell files coming out right now is exposing that. It's showing us how, the timing of this, if you were to believe that there is some sort of, operation that's been game planned out in advance, the timing of this would be perfect. Yeah. Nancy Mace. Now, I'm not a fan of Nancy Mace at all. I think she's pretty awful, actually.
Not even dem titties?
I mean, she's a good looking woman, but she introduced that resolution to expose Congress's misconduct, right? Sexual misconduct, put them in the public. And then a couple months later, or a month later, if not even a month later, we get the Swalwell coming out. Gallego's going to go down, I think, too, next. Just keep your eyes on that. I think Gallego's next. Tony Gonzalez from Texas, where congressman from Texas, resigns because he was sleeping with his staffer.
Yeah.
So when you see all of this come out, and I was talking to one of those guys out in the water today about the same exact thing, I really feel like the people that make it through the primary process through our fake elections and make their way into Congress, all of them are fucking owned. All of them have some sort of blackmail that can be dangled, in front of them to make sure that they toe the line, to make sure they do the right thing, stand with the party, like that kind of bullshit. Man, somebody needs to go back and read Washington's farewell address.
Well, it's amazing. Myself, Ash, Ghost, Drake, Chris, in various ways. One of the things we've been talking about lately a lot is just that of saying, like, it is so strange that some of the most controversial takes that are advanced on Badlands are directly in line with the most famous and lionized of our founding fathers, right? Directly in line. And what's more interesting is that when you go back and read whatever primary source documents you can find of that era, letters, arguments, transcriptions of debates, they were not popular stances at that time because they were fighting the same, besides the British Empire, they were fighting that same subversion from within. You had cucks like Alexander Hamilton trying to systematize everything and largely succeeding. And you had other founders calling him an abject traitor to the vision of what they wanted for the American people. So, I don't know if it's unfortunate or fortunate, but I'll choose to spin it in a positive light and say, these arguments are nothing new, but I do think a concerning trend that I'm certainly trying to push back at, I think you are. And I think actually it's really good that you push back on that kind of stuff because you're somebody who's been talking about the election system for so long. You're not just one of these like blow it all up, blow the whole thing up. And I think it's good when somebody who's been balls deep in the election system like you have been is saying, like, we should still have the conversation about whether or not this whole system should be here and what we're trying to even do with this system. But that your primary focus is like, first of all, we need the system to work as it was intended in the first place, or rather, as we the American people would intend it. Whether or not it's working as intended is probably, an argument for a different day. But you might think the system thinks it's been working just fine for them.
Yeah, I think if we can fix the voting system, I think we have a possibility of putting this country back on the right course. And without it, though, I think, and again, I don't want to doom out. I mean, I think we'll be okay. You're going to go about your normal daily life like nothing, is. And that's the problem is that it doesn't get uncomfortable enough. But they slowly, it's like the boiling frog, right? We're slowly a boiling frog at this point. As long as we stay comfortable and we keep our faces down at our iPhones and we start losing the interaction we have with one another on a personal and physical level, and we don't know who our neighbors are, as long as we allow that water to keep boiling, eventually we're just going to get burned in it. And I don't think it'll be during our lifetimes, but your son, that's a possibility.
Right. Which is why we got to keep having these conversations and doing 100%. This shit.
It's all for the
all right, man. Great talk. Great to have you on the show. I'm sure we'll do it again. What do you got coming up the next week?
I'll be on Badlands daily, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. with a consortium of hosts. And let's see, that's about it. I did a really good show. If you guys want to check it out, on Saturday morning at on my Rumble channel, President Trump signed the an executive order to promote research into psychedelics. And what he did with that executive order, by the way, Joe Rogan being there was hilarious because Joe Rogan and him are supposed to be like hate each other and all that shit. It's so funny. But what he did with that, if this ibogaine, if we can get usage of that in the United States, that could be the biggest blow to big pharma that we'll see in our lifetimes. And that includes the most favored nation status that he just got through. It would people don't understand what ibogaine is and what some of these psychedelics are capable of doing. And, this is why I'm CannCon, cannabis conservative, because of alternative medicines and like this. This is, it could be absolutely fantastic. And Trump, I would highly encourage people to go back and watch that press conference, especially towards the end. There's a guy that starts talking and somebody in the audience, a member of the media is like, President Trump asked, do they work, referring to SSRIs and antidepressants? And she chimes in. And this is unheard of. You don't do this in Oval Office signings like this. She chimes in from the peanut gallery and says, no, they don't work. I'm on a couple and they don't work. And President Trump just kind of seemed like he was blown away by this. And he's like, wow, I did not know that. Well, then we need to do this. We need to get into this. I'm so excited about that right there.
Man, that's I've been talking about this in my own life a lot lately because I deal with debilitating nerve pain, and it got a lot better for a while. And I had a bunch of surgeries, and then got Lyme disease 2 years ago, and that just brought it all. Well, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease 2 years ago. They think I've had it for quite a long time, which is why these things are probably related. Turns out nerve injuries, catastrophic nerve injuries mixed with Lyme disease are not a good combination. But for me personally, cannabis does not help me. I've tried it many times. It just the way it interacts with my brain, it actually makes me focus very heavily on my nerve dysfunction. But I have tried psilocybin, and I have a much better reaction to that, ironically, where some people freak out on it, right? But I'm really interested in this because I'm, in a lot of pain lately and need to, I have done a good job in my life of staying very far away from opioids because there's history in my family, and I was around too many fighters who got totally fucked on all that stuff. And I'm sure you, knowing all the veterans have seen that story a million times. But yeah, we're little microcosms of these things, but to not have to like skulk around in the shadows to try to find help would certainly be something. Yeah, I mean, that's really encouraging. I'm glad you ended on that point, because we talk about all these big picture things of like elections and wars and those little things. But a lot of the most encouraging things to me are these orders and these things that are getting announced like every day that could fundamentally alter our future in very bright ways that are going to have these lag effects. So yeah, that's a great one to end on, but I'm certainly personally interested in it too.
Yep. And if they're able to cripple big pharma, I mean, that does a lot for the info war. It crushes the media. It's a huge deal. So I'm hoping he follows through with this. And yeah,
good shit, man. Great to have you.
Yep.
I'm gonna hang with the people for a little bit, but I'll see you on my. Hey, when are you doing Sword Punk on book club?
I think the next book we're doing, is License to Lie, and then we'll probably do it after that one. We're trying to make it to the midterms and stay on, with election related and writing this thing.
Do something fun after the midterms.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We want to have a moment where we can actually breathe. Plus, I also want to read the book first. I haven't had a chance to read it because I'm on this book. So as soon as we get that done, we'll get. I'm pretty sure I have a copy. Yeah, I have a copy. I have a copy. You gave me one.
All right, man.
So, all right, brother. Appreciate it, man.
All right, dude. Good to see you.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right, guys. That was a fun one. That one sort of stayed on topic and ended up closing some loops we opened at the beginning of the show. That worked out pretty well. It's almost like he's been doing this for a while with hosts of various persuasions. I was told that the fake Buffalo Sabres defeated the Boston Bruins in a comeback in what is now, the rules, once again a fake sport. It was real before recording. It is now fake once more until Tuesday night or whenever the Bruins next play. The sport has a chance to be real again. I'll hang out with you guys for a little bit here and then get out of here. But before I transition into a little solo section here and get to your rants and boosts, if you want to send anything over, go ahead and do so. I'll get to it before I sign off. I do have another sponsor to thank, and that is by, once again, our friends at Rumble. And that is... Let me see if I have it right here. Or I can hit your rants first. We have Tom Terrific, who sent $25 over for the cause. Thank you, Tom. Always supporting the show. We also have Gadget New. I pronounced it Goo earlier, which is incorrect, but it's actually Gadget New. Had sent that over using Rumble Wallet, so thank you for using that. We also had 15 Tonya Ba, or Tonya Bay, who also tipped via the Rumble Wallet. So that's pretty sweet. Thank you. And then Envo said, what happened to OPEC? That used to be the boogeyman that altered the price at a sneeze, and they're nowhere to be heard. That's actually a really great rant. That's actually a really great rant to lead us into some of what I want to talk about. Right on the back of that discussion, and CannCon actually teed us up for some of this as well. But before I get into a little bit of that, I also want to do a little call to action. First of all, can you guys please hit the thumbs up button? I appreciate you doing so when you do so. Speaking of sword punk, let me trundle over here. Oh no. What a disaster. What a disaster this has become this last 1 minute. Okay. I love that word, trundle. Did you guys ever have trundle beds growing up? Is that a New England term? My cousins had trundle beds. So when we slept over, they would have like a regular bed, but then a little bed would pull out under the bed, and it was called a trundle bed. They made for incredible wrestling opportunities, except if there was a wood frame on the real bed, you were liable to crack your head open on that wood frame if you were engaged in Mortal Kombat. And my cousins and I did have Mortal Kombat tournaments where our parents thought we were just playing, but we literally fought each other like tooth and nail until submission. And some of those battles did wind up with hospital trips, including for me, unfortunately. My elder cousin of 4 years whipped me into a wood-framed bed and split my head open down to the bone. And I came back to the party after I got stitches. So, yeah, trundle beds. Anyway, we should bring trundle beds back. They're pretty awesome. I want to bring up sword punk because there are, right over in the corner there, I have 8 copies of sword punk left from the limited edition, leather-bound print run of this book. The only way there will ever be another is if I write a sequel. If you guys want me to write a sequel, it was teed up for a sequel. I will write a sequel, and at that point in time, I would probably put these... I'd probably do a new print run of book 1 to give people an opportunity to get it again. The reason I have some extra copies is because there were people who pledged to donate to the campaign to produce these books and then withdrew those pledges, but I had already put the orders in. So I already paid for these books to be produced, but then lost the money that was donated to produce the books. So if you are interested in getting a signed leather-bound edition of Swordpunk, which is all about crime syndicate being taken down by badass martial artists in a near future South Korea, then check out Swordpunk. Email realmrsburningbright@gmail.com. realmrsburningbright@gmail.com. Tell her you're interested in a copy. You do have to pay for it. They're $75. That includes shipping to the US. The reason they're so expensive is because they're leather bound. They're quality with cream paper. And I already paid for the production and the packaging and all that kind of stuff. And the shipping we do ourselves. So if you're interested in that, reach out to her and she will tell you how to submit payment and we will get that shipped over to you as soon as possible. There was a bunch of people that reached out in the last couple of weeks around GART Nashville and they have received their copies. So yeah, just wanted to let people know about that. Also, another little public service announcement. Badlands Story Hour, the movie show, the movie framed show that I do on Tuesday nights with Chris Paul at 9 p.m. is moving. It is moving to Thursday night in the 10:30 p.m. slot. And this is because G-Money is taking a step back, not from Badlands. He's still a Badlander. I believe he's going to be in Deadwood at GART, but from streaming as frequently as he's been streaming. And he's had that Thursday night slot locked down for a while. So he just said, hey, if I'm not going to be doing this, or I don't know how much I'm going to be streaming with Rug Pull, give the spot to somebody else. So Chris and I have talked for years about that Tuesday night slot not necessarily being the best slot for us for a couple reasons, in my opinion. Number one, it's not the latest slot. Number two, I think Tuesday night, people in this audience are so geared up and in the info war. They're in the meat of the media cycle, right? The story cycle, the news cycle starts Mondays, Sunday night, really. It just rockets you through Wednesday. You get DPH Wednesday night. You get all these shows. You get DEF CON. You get Baseless. And we were actually asking people, John was asking people if they wanted a new show. You still might get a new show. I don't know what the details are on that. But if they were to get a new show, what do they want the theme to be? Do they want it to be political? Do they want it to be analytical? And I saw like 30, 40 responses out of our GART chat, and none of them were requesting a political show. All of them were like hangout show, something casual, something chill, something cultural. So we thought, hey, we'll try it out on Thursday night, 10:30 p.m. Eastern. I think that it'll be give us a little more breathing room, and I'm interested if more people want to check the show out. Tattooed Teacher is one of our OGs, Story Hour true believers. If you guys have not tried Story Hour, give it a try. If you are into what I do on Sunday nights with the narrative and narrative warfare, all these things that some of us were talking about 5 years ago that have become ubiquitous in a good way in the truth community, just talking about narrative and who controls the story. Story Hour, Chris and I use a movie, a specific movie, and as people who watch that show know, we really use that as a jumping off point for discussions on how the story framing and plot structure is used in the current zeitgeist of the info war and psychological war. And we also use it to kind of play hindsight with how these structures work. And we just have some really big picture philosophical discussions that those movies often provoke. And sometimes when we do something like Armageddon last week, we just talk about how funny it is and how funny some of our reality defining paradigms are. So check it out. The movie for this week. This week, we are moving to Thursday night. So this week, the movie is my selection, and that is Eastern Promises, starring Viggo Mortensen, directed by David Cronenberg. That movie deals with trafficking. It deals with Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs and organized crime. It deals with intel elements and subversion, infiltration over invasion. It's also just a fantastic movie, and it's got some very heavy Russian thematic themes, motifs throughout it. One of my favorite films, and it was directly requested by Mr. Rise Attire, who's been pestering me about it for months, and I kept forgetting about it. It is one of my favorite films. It is right over there on my shelf in that area. So check that out and join us on Thursday night for that one. Okay. Famous last words. This is going to be a short little solo section. I wanted to just follow up a little bit on the sovereign disentanglement discussion. By the way, I know a lot of these shows are topical. There's not a lot of time to rewatch things in the info war. All of us have this issue. But if you guys want my framework for what is going on in Iran and will go on in Cuba and Taiwan and what has been going on in Ukraine and what went on in Venezuela, etc., check out last week's 2 weeks ago episode of The Narrative, episode 64, Sovereign Disentanglement. I did a solo episode for the first time. Really appreciate your feedback. A lot of great feedback to that. People love the guests, but they also just like me being retarded at times. And I wanted to lay out a template of what I feel sovereign disentanglement is. That is a term I made up to encapsulate and define what I think Trump is doing and why I do not think it's a doomer's take to think that Trump is lying to us about what's going on in Iran. That's the template. I'm not going to go through that whole thing tonight, but I think I just want to show you a couple examples of how I think we can see this in the offing throughout this stuff. We had a post yesterday, earlier today, from Donald Trump. Iran decided to fire bullets yesterday in the Strait of Hormuz, a total violation of our ceasefire agreement. Many of them were aimed at a French ship. I'm not going to go through all of this thing. But there's a couple little tidbits, and you guys are as crazy as me. So, let's read too much into things. That's sort of what we do. Iran recently announced they were closing the strait, which is strange because our blockade had already closed it. They're helping us without knowing, and they are the ones that lose with the closed passage. $500 million a day. The United States loses nothing. In fact, many ships are heading right now to the US. Compliments of the IRGC, always wanting to be the tough guy. We're offering a very fair and reasonable deal. So, and then he says here at the end, they'll come down fast, oil prices, power plants, bridges, etc. They'll come down easy. If they don't take the deal, it'll be my honor to do what has to be done. So that's one little comm there. Another one, he's talking about the firing incident, the Gulf of Tonkin. We're getting a new Gulf of Tonkin here. I had predicted that the Gulf of Tonkin rerun was going to be in the Taiwan Strait. I still think it might be, but we got a little mini Gulf of Tonkin here. It did not involve a U.S. ship. I think the U.S. Gulf of Tonkin rerun is going to be Taiwan Strait. But we got a preview of that in the Strait of Hormuz. And look at what Trump says here. He says, the TOUSCA is under U.S. Treasury sanctions because of their prior history of illegal activity. We have full custody of the ship and are seeing what's on board. Kind of interesting. Today, an Iranian-flagged cargo ship named TOUSCA, and then he says, TOUSCA is under U.S. Treasury sanctions because of prior history of illegal activity. Could this just be an Iranian tanker? Sure. Anything's possible. Could it also be a little hint as to what Donald Trump was talking about in Venezuela when we were seizing Venezuelan flagged tankers? Were those really Venezuelan tankers? Or were they OPEC tankers? Were they globalist tankers? I mean, I think that's part of what's going on here. My foundational theory here is that Donald Trump is effecting a pincer with the so-called Iranian regime against the globalist deep state. And what's so interesting to me is that Friday's de-escalation was all about the Iran situation. And one of the things I've been saying in the Iran war series I've been writing on my Substack is that all of Trump's attempts to de-escalate are immediately met with a fresh escalation. Escalate to de-escalate. That's been a pattern here. But one of the things I've been pointing out is pay attention to who is reporting on the escalations, not the de-escalations, right? Pay attention to this going forward. I think there's a pattern here that you can see kind of the disentanglement that's going on. Donald Trump, most of his proactive narrative deployments regarding Iran are de-escalatory, right? Most of the time that Trump wakes up and just blasts a Truth Social post out that is not in response to something, a proactive narrative setting post is usually de-escalatory with Iran. He's usually saying the war's over, it's going well, we're in negotiations, things are going great. Then it's usually globalist or mainstream media that reports on fresh escalations in response to Trump's de-escalation, right? Trump de-escalates on Friday, says everything's cool. The media reports that the Iranians disagree, and then the media reports, and the French report and the British report, that they're being fired on by the IRGC. And then Trump responds to that, right? It's this ratcheting up. But I think you can read between the beats a little bit here and look at Trump's rhetoric saying, you know, I've said the war's over 1 million times, 37 times, and they keep just escalating it. In the easy framing of that is that the Iranian regime is escalating things. That's not how I read it. I think we're watching sovereign disentanglement. I think Donald Trump is actually freeing Iran from the clutches, not necessarily of the Iranian regime, but of the globalist oligarchy, the globalist NATO system. A couple of these headlines I don't think were there as of my last show, or maybe they were, and I don't remember. But sovereign disentanglement operation, let's look at how the media is retroactively reporting on Venezuela. Venezuela seems to be going well. Question mark? Sort of like some of us predicted. The administration's plan is working, but democracy remains elusive. This is out of The Atlantic. I've been telling you guys for several years, The Atlantic is one of those key narrative setters within the media protectorate. And they actually made news today, Sunday, April 19th. I'm sure many of you saw this, with the Kash Patel secret special report about how he's a drunk Indian whatever. Is that true? Probably not. But that's what they do. They set narratives. So they're setting this narrative. They're codifying. Venezuela's going well, but democracy remains elusive. That goes in line with a lot of what CannCon and I discussed tonight. Democracy is one of those flag trigger words that is usually the opposite of what they say it is. The other headline in light of this from CNN, Iran's new regime looks much the same, only harsher. Interesting. Could it be that the globalist media is seeing that Donald Trump's Venezuela model worked really well for Donald Trump and for the American people in Venezuela, and that he is doing that in Iran, and that the regime change that Trump did in Venezuela and that he is doing in Iran might not be real regime change, and the media is picking up on that? And is there another place where I said this template had been set, and now everything is being normalized there, and relations are being normalized, but we were told there was a very serious and scary regime change? What country would that be? Would that be Syria, where the last U.S. convoy is exiting after a brutal 14-year regime change proxy war, wherein Bashir al-Assad was chased out of there by a brave new regime and given asylum in Russia? In Moscow? And then I said this would happen in Venezuela, and then I said it would happen in Iran, and then in Cuba. Interesting. So the macro framing of what I think is going on here, and that Iran is a microcosm of, is we are in a multipolar war on the rise of the new axis and the fall of our so-called allies. That was a subhead I put out before Christmas in 2025. Do you guys think things are going well from the perspective of Donald Trump's rhetoric for our so-called allies? Are things going well for the French and the British and the Europeans? How about our Asian allies? For all the squeeze and energy squeeze I'm hearing that China is under right now, do you know how things are going for Japan? Or South Korea? Or Indonesia? In light of the energy squeeze? Do you know how dependent they are on the Strait of Hormuz, on this globalist chokehold? We are not dependent on that as the United States. China is not dependent on it either. I believe less than 20% of China's energy comes through the Strait of Hormuz. That's sizable, but it's not crippling to them. Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia are much more heavily squeezed. Australia is much more heavily squeezed. So where do these people turn to? They turn to the United States. They turn to Russia. The United States and Russia are the two prime beneficiaries of the disentanglement that's happening in Iran. This is part of the multipolar war framework I laid out last year. People kept asking me, like, what do you think the Sovereign Alliance is doing? Obviously, I've been writing about the Sovereign Alliance and the concept for years that was inspired by the Q drops. Well, I think that they are waging a multipolar war against the globalist hegemon. And I think they are using a core mechanism that I wrote on January 11th called sovereign disentanglement on Maduro and the Mad Kings of Multipolaria. So go revisit these pieces. A multipolar war and sovereign disentanglement. These are macro pieces about the macro framework. What is the war? What is the nature of the war that is playing out? The real war, not the fake one that everyone's reacting to all the time. Second, what is the mechanism by which that war is being waged by the Sovereign Alliance? I would say it's using sovereign disentanglement. And you guys, if you watch the Blitz on Saturday, by the way, Ghost and I recorded the Blitz on the Badlands Substack, badlands.substack.com. Let me just bring that up to share. Ghost, Ash, and I work really hard on this Monday through Friday. We do the Badlands brief 5 days a week, which is supposed to be like a war room for the Badlands audience. This is all free, but on Saturdays, we've begun putting out a video show, a 1-hour show, which is hard for Ghost and I, called the Badlands Blitz. And at the end of that show, I thanked people for signing up for paid subscriptions, even though everything we do is free, and acknowledged things are tough out there for us, they're tough out there for you. And I just said thank you to the people who did subscribe with paid subscriptions, even though you don't have to. And guess which episode has now generated the most upgrades from a free subscription to a paid subscription? Is that one. So just thank you guys, and thank you to the ones who just by us being like, hey, thanks for supporting us, a bunch more people support us. We do this stuff for free for a reason, but it's tough. You guys know it's tough. It's tough out there. I also really appreciate, I've had a bunch of people recently after a pretty rough 2025 financially, renew. All my stuff on Burning Bright is free as well. burningbright.substack.com. It's different stuff than what I put on Badlands. And a bunch of you recently have upgraded over there to a paid subscription. You can cancel those things anytime you want to, right? There's people that like sign up for a month or two, and then they're like, all right, they Netflix it up, which is cool. But what I think is really special about this audience is that Netflix, you either have it or you don't, right? You either pay for it and have it, or you don't. And a lot of the stuff we do, you have it whether or not you pay for it. So the fact that some of you do choose to pay for it is very humbling. And like, we literally need it. So thank you. Or else we can't do this stuff as frequently. Anyway, back to this framework, sovereign disentanglement. This is my favorite headline, selfishly, that I have seen in ages, that Ghost flagged to me, that we talked about on that Blitz episode. From RT, the Iranian knot needs to be untangled, not cut. This was from Sergei Lavrov. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Man, are there some signals here? And our chat, you decide. Narrative chat, you decide. Because it would not be humble of me, nor would I ever presume to take credit for a hat tip or a boop. But you guys decide, is this a Sovereign Alliance boop to yours truly? Let me lay out the case. Put a 1 in the chat if it's a boop, and put a 2 if you don't think it was a boop. So Sergei Lavrov, the Iranian knot needs to be untangled, not cut. Puts this out April 15th. Well, January 11th, on Maduro and the Mad Kings of Multipolaria, sovereign disentanglement. And that's not all, folks. On the subject of sovereign disentanglement, I said the following in this article. This article was prompted by the Venezuela operation, but what did I say in this one? By the way, you don't have to be a genius to know this stuff. I just take Donald Trump at his word when it comes to the 5th Gen info war, not when it comes to voting in fake elections. But I digress. I said, speaking of templates, the info war is picking up on one having been set for Iran as well. January 11th, first Venezuela, next Iran. And my commentary. Another hotbed of regime ops that is currently in the midst of its own color revolution. Many, even in this otherwise discerning audience, have fallen for. I got to take my shots, guys, because I take a lot of them. So I got to spank you a little bit, right? Mrs. Wright might enjoy that. You don't enjoy it as much. You're not supposed to. It's weird if you do. So sometimes I got to spank the class, spank you in front of the class. Then I said, so is Trump going to spirit away Khomeini only to leave the rest of his ruling party in control while rug pulling the global regime's planned version of the change event? And is he going to grant Khomeini the same sort of photo ops as Maduro? That's a secondary point. Hasn't really come true. But that's pretty good, right? And then, what did I follow this one up with? On March 20th. To my knowledge, I am the only person in the context of the info war with any degree of readership or following that has used this terminology. You guys know I have been calling Iran and Israel Donald Trump's Kobayashi Maru since 2023. since right after October 7th. Now, I know that Elon Musk stole that framing, and some of these other people, Michael Every of Rabobank, stole that framing, and that's what people do with us. They steal our stuff and remonetize it. But I specifically referred to the Iran situation as the Iranian knot, and that was a reference to the Gordian knot. How many of you are aware of the Gordian knot? How many of you know what the Gordian knot is all about? Alexander the Great? Have you heard about him? Well, let's give you a little refresher. The Gordian knot is a legendary, impossibly intricate knot from the Phrygian tradition that Alexander the Great untied in 333 BC by slicing it with his sword. The act represents a bold, unconventional solution to a seemingly impossible problem. Today, the phrase symbolizes cutting through complexity with direct, decisive action. The Gordian knot is an impossibly intricate knot. The reason I framed the Iranian situation this way is because I directly referenced the Gordian knot. And I said that according to the central narrative, Iran and Israel is a Gordian knot. It is an impossible to untangle situation. And the only person who can untangle it is Donald Trump, because he's Captain James T. Kirk. That's the Kobayashi Maru scenario I've been laying out for months. The Iranian knot was a reference to the Gordian knot. And my premise here was that Donald Trump was not going to cut the knot, because cutting the Iranian knot would result in catastrophic damages that we are seeing little ripples of, little kind of echoes of what could have been if it was cut. But it's being disentangled instead, using this sovereign disentanglement playbook that you should read up on or watch that show I did on it if you prefer video version of this. So Sergei Lavrov says the Iranian knot needs to be untangled, not cut. And he's referencing Israel. Israel's erroneous belief that it can destroy Iran should not be supported by the US, the Russian foreign minister has said. Quote, Israel appears totally convinced that Iran must be destroyed. I cannot understand how such a belief is possible. So obviously there's still some kayfabe going on here between the Russians and Donald Trump. But basically, I think that Sergei Lavrov, who is basically the mouthpiece of the Sovereign Alliance, I saw some people in chat saying that. Did he, Spotzel? Is that true? Spotzel says, when Lavrov was talking about Russia-China-US alliance leading to world peace, I replied with your first Sovereign Alliance piece. He liked the post. Damn. Well, if that's true, that's cool. But anyway, they won't say that terminology yet. But it's coming. You know it's coming, right? They are using the multipolar war framework quite a bit. But that was, I don't know, guys. I actually don't say everything's a hat tip, despite my tongue-in-cheek nature. But it is hard to look at that one and think it's not a little bit of a tip. Just the tip. And how is this not being disentangled? The sovereign disentanglement playbook is not just about the US. We need other nations to be involved in it, which might tell you why the invisible enemy that Donald Trump has been talking about is trying to foment discord between the Sovereign Alliance nations. China rejects a baseless smear it's sending weapons to Iran after Trump warns of big problems. We had another attempt to escalate between sovereign bros. State Department says Cuba is linked to thousands of fighters supporting Russia in Ukraine war. Interesting. Proxy v. proxy. But then Trump comes out here, rugs the anti-sovereign alliance rhetoric a little bit. Trump says China is very happy with the Strait of Hormuz move and claims cooperation on Iran. Cooperation. Interesting. Is this sovereign alliance members backstopping each other and helping each other survive the disentangling of the Iranian knot? Do we have any other signals that that's going on? Russia vows to fill China's energy resource gap amid Hormuz crisis in Lavrov-Xi meeting. Speaking of Lavrov. So keep in mind what's going on here. The disentanglement of the Iranian knot, which is crushing the globalist hegemon and NATO countries, the EU and Asia outside of China. They are getting crushed by the disentangling of the Iranian knot. The sovereign alliance pillars are helping each other backstop their energy reserves and transition to survive the fallout of the Iranian disentanglement. That's my framing. It shouldn't shock anybody that Russia's helping China. But what might shock a few who have still not seen the light of the sovereign alliance, the U.S. Treasury extends Russian crude waiver amid supply disruptions. Kind of a boring headline, right? Energy shit, sanctions, supply chain mumbo jumbo. This is a continuance of the United States Treasury's freezing of sanctions, meaning unfreezing of these tariffs on seaborne Russian energy. Where is this Russian energy that is now unsanctioned by the United States during the Iran crisis? Where is it going? To China. So, to put that together, the globalist hegemon is being crushed by the fallout of the Iranian knot from an energy perspective, right? They are sending all of their tankers, a menagerie of tankers, an embarrassment of tankers, to us, to the US, to buy our energy. And the ones who can't do that, or who won't buy our energy, but mostly they can't because of these sanctions, Russia and China, are helping each other with the fallout of the Iranian knot. And who is allowing them to help each other? The United States, by unsanctioning their energy. So for everybody telling you that Donald Trump is putting the squeeze on China, Donald Trump is literally unsanctioning the Russian oil that the Russians are now selling to China to alleviate the energy pressure on China and the financial pressure on Russia. While all of the financial and energy pressure on NATO and on the paper tiger is coming to the US. We are alleviating the pressure on them, not because we're helping them, but because it's boosting us. So this is all in line with a series of writings that I did some time ago. And one of the macro themes, I wrote an article in July, Axis and Allies flirting with war on the path to peace. But this is all about the inversion of the Axis and Allies paradigm that we have been programmed with in the Western mind, heading back to the aftermath of World War II. There is an inversion going on in this piece. Speaking of predictions, and yeah, I took a bunch of victory laps. Spotzel clarified it was Kamil Dmitriev, not Lavrov. Still cool, but I do want my Lavrov shout out, although we can count that as a half chub. Like just the bit of a half chub shout out by Lavrov with the disentanglement Iranian knot little markers there. So in the Axis and Allies piece, I talked about the inversion of the Axis and Allies paradigm, a slow inversion. And I specifically said that the media, the globalist media, was going to start framing, quote, a new axis, which was going to include, who was it going to include, guys? Who was it going to include? I have to find the actual passage because unfortunately I write a lot of things. Observe how the new axis represented by Russia and China are making the inroads with Iran. So I said the new axis was going to be Russia, China, and Iran. And a few months after this, the globalist media referred to these people as the axis of upheaval. This is one of the NGOs that said that. A new crink. Axis of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I also mentioned North Korea in that piece, by the way. This stuff isn't hard to see coming. So, it's just interesting. Back to the sovereign disentanglement playbook. What does Donald Trump need to disentangle this operation? To disentangle the globalist hegemon? He needs villains. He needs adversaries. He needs people to posture against. He needs nations to posture against. He needs the mandate to remove U.S. interests from these regions. How does he get that mandate, given the immediate short-term disruptions to Americans that such a disentanglement operation begets? He needs villains. He needs to be responding to an axis. Who is that axis? Iran, Russia, and China. He is helping all of them, while the public narrative is that he is warring with them by proxy. Which I also said in my latest article before my latest one. This is the arc of the peacemakers bending toward convergence once again. The invisible enemy's entanglement strategy is being turned against it. The villains we need are doing their part. The collective mind is registering the contrast very slowly and then all at once. The EU and NATO alliances that once presumed themselves the unchained architects of a unipolar forever empire are in freefall, while the US can play this game all day. What I also say in here is that Russia and China can as well. And they are signaling to you, the US, that this has a good ending. Europe is drafting a post-war plan to free up Hormuz without the US. So they're already scrambling, while Trump is talking about no more Mr. Nice Guy. Escalate to de-escalate, right? But what's really going on here, to me, is the construction of a new multipolar world, a new multipolar world order, based on first principles and a concept I call sovereign radiation. I know I name a lot of things. I do that because they're complex topics I'm trying to distill. So this is my latest article. You guys should head over to burningbright.substack.com. It's called Of Breakers and Builders, From Sovereign Disentanglement to Multipolar Reconstruction. We've got the boys here with their Golden Age crew. I believe we are watching a controlled demolition of the system of systems. Many of us talk about this on the US front, right? Election systems, Congress, congressional authority, presidential authority, the NGO infrastructure, intel agencies, the administrative state, right? That's going on in the US. The US is a micro. On the macro, I believe this is going on using sovereign disentanglement, and it's leading to multipolar reconstruction. I don't have time tonight, but in this piece, I also go through a lot of hints that are being dropped that I think we're going to enter a new post-war economy. A post-war economy without the real war that tends to precede such a post-war economy. The Pentagon approaches automakers, manufacturers to boost weapons productions. That may seem, again, like another one of these random headlines, but I think it's signal as to what's really going on here. Let me just respond here. On the back end. We're going to get out of here in a minute. This may seem like another random headline about car makers and manufacturers. What this is indicative of, to me, is sovereign disentanglement and a post-war boom, like post-World War II boom, but that was coming off the back of a world war. I think the war is a translation layer. I think the war is a means to an end, a narrative means to an end, and that what's really going on here is the Reconstruction era. Reconstruction on the back of a controlled demolition that I call sovereign disentanglement, because we are in a multipolar war. So if you guys are interested in that, don't get scared because I just scrolled a bunch, okay? Put your like audio reading thing on. Do that. And again, thank you very much to the people supporting me over there. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for sending boosts over. I do have a boost I'm going to read. And thank you for all the support. Thank you for liking the show. And thank you when you're over on my Substack, when you upgrade to a paid subscription. It's all free. Spread the word over there. If you do upgrade to a paid subscription, Substack is like the platform where most of your dollar makes it to who you're trying to support. So if that makes a difference to you, please check it out. Of Breakers and Builders, I think it will fill you with a lot of logic-based hopium, which is what we're after. I also have a boost here from C. Laura Nova. $25. I know you made this on DPH at GART last weekend, but I wanted to make sure to give you an individual shout out, BB, for the best explanation of the petrodollar and its role in U.S. foreign policy that I've ever heard. I shared it with many. Thank you. Yeah, I sort of spurged out on that GART Nashville stream in response to a question on the petrodollar and accidentally gave a pretty good explanation. Apparently, I got a lot of messages about that. We don't have time to play it tonight because I want to get out of here before the 3-hour mark. But yeah, it's like a little 5-minute spurg out, probably 7 minutes. Who knows? Who knows with me? So go check that out. Check out that Nashville stream Chris, John, and I did from there. Great to see all you guys in Nashville. We do have one sponsor before we get out of here that we'll see if it works this time because it can be a little persnickety. That is also by our friends at Rumble. It did work this time, and that is the Kids Guide. All right, parents, real talk for a second. America's about to hit a huge milestone. We're coming up on America's 250th birthday, 250 years of freedom, grit, sacrifice, and the greatest experiment in self-government the world has ever seen. This is the perfect moment to help your kids understand why this country matters, not just fireworks and hot dogs, but the story behind it all. There's a free guide called The Kids Guide to America's 250th Birthday, and it's a great way to introduce kids to how America began, who the founding fathers were, what they risked, why the ideas they fought for still matter today. This guide sends kids back to the moment when brave men signed the Declaration of Independence, knowing full well they were risking their lives for freedom. It breaks down all the way kids can understand and enjoy without watering it down or turning it into boring schoolwork. If you care about raising kids who know where the country came from and why it's worth preserving, this is something free. This is something you'll want to grab. The best part is it's completely free with a special offer. You just need to pay $2 for shipping and processing. Head to freeusabirthday.com and the Kids Guide to America's 250th birthday for your kids today. America's story matters. Make sure the next generation knows it. freeusabirthday.com. Thank you to them for helping to sponsor the show. And again, thank you to you guys. Fantastic to see so many of you over in Nashville. And yeah, support what we're doing or don't. We will see you Thursday night. I will see you Wednesday night on DPH. Do your homework. You have more time now during the week to do your homework. Catch some downtime. Skip a John Harold show. Watch Eastern Promises. Join Chris and I if you have not tried Story Hour. Give it a try. We're going to blow your minds on Thursday night. And next week, I believe I am going to be joined by, is becoming a worryingly frequent guest, the ghost of based Patrick Henry himself, will join me next week to spurg out about the Jews. No, I don't know if we'll do that. We probably will, but I mean, we'll talk about a lot of this stuff and see where we're at in the very real. The real war was fake as of Friday, but now the fake war is real as of Monday. When you're seeing this, most of you, it's okay. It'll be fake again by Friday and then real again by next Monday. Sometimes they swap. So just don't lose your head while everyone around you is losing theirs. And as I always say, I'm going to outro with the intro. So Jess, if you can take us off YouTube, or maybe I can press buttons myself. I'm a grown adult. To the YouTube crowd, we're saying goodbye. Thank you for supporting over there as well. And I'm going to outro with the intro.